The AG's office has filed. Don't need it now.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what
They, so, yeah, so we discussed it and. There's a good. Being dismissed. Who knows what. That's, you know, the top of the morning.
it's just weird to me.
Yes. Sorry, new meeting room. Here. No, you guys good with this?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
And then just a reminder, so. Key up your lights.
Get your sign.
Like they start feeding back off each other.
Or you might be able to do it just at the
Just giving
podium.
us. That's right. Shane hasn't been having. What's that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, so just state your name and your case number that you're here for. I forgot to mention.
Am I the last one on the docket?
So, not necessarily, this right here is just in chronological order, or numerical order, I'm sorry. So these go extremely quickly, so.
I know it's the worst.
Yours will actually.
You might put them on the TV.
No.
If you like mine, I can.
So it's like the staff attorneys recommend find no violation.
Drill bad.
Okay, so here's one of the first ones to go forward. Get you out of here pretty quick. Absolutely.
Don't think so.
If you, so
Like
it's the
multimedia.
team screen that's up here. On this one. Yes.
The good thing.
So I can switch it to presenter, whoever's talking.
Hey, you, big brother.
Hey, you're in control now.
Okay, that's good.
We should have got there. Also, I gave a quick.
Oh, I see.
It's true. Click on, you know, just make sure we turn back off when we're done. You to be major movies. I'll be signing autographs all afternoon. That's good. It's just the Hicks complaints. That's just two reasons.
I mean, the complaints, but the complaint that's sent out, I don't know if it's in this, this might just be this.
Goodness gracious. Times, yeah, it's just fixed.
Ms. Cardelone, you're here, are you here with them? Are you here on a case or, oh, she's just here with you? Okay, just checking, make sure there's not a case that needs. Okay.
We are ready to start today's Ohio Elections Commission meeting. This is the meeting of August 15, 2024. First, we'll go with our
We'll be calling
executive
roll.
director calling the roll, correct.
Mr. Caraway. Present. Ms. Davis.
Here.
Mr. Lyle.
Here.
Mr. Knight.
Here.
Mr. Kirschner.
Here.
Vice Chair Hagan. Chair Tavares.
Here.
All members are present.
Thank you. Next, we'll go with the approval of the minutes. Has everyone reviewed those? We can ask for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that. Accept and approve.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved.
Thank you very
That
much.
is a vote of 6 to. Okay, group recommendations. First group,
I left them upstairs. I'm sorry, go ahead.
that's all right. The first group is 2024 R-369, 2024 R-384, and 385. And I know we've got someone here for 385. So Mr. Richter, do you want to take the other two?
Yeah, let's deal with items number 20 and 35, 2024, 369, 384. As I explained, in both of those cases, the report was filed. It was filed after the 4 p.m. deadline, but also at a time while the board office was open for business. Historically, the commission has found no violation in those cases. And so that is my recommendation. I'll be glad to answer any of the questions if the commission has any.
Madam Chair, I do have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Knight.
Hit the thing here. Here we go. Sorry about that. I mean, do we have a written policy or is it just historical precedent?
From early on in the commission's life as an independent agency, those are, my original recommendation to the commission back in those days was, to find a violation, but for good cause. And as it was discussed, the first commission said, no, if they're making the filing, even if it's after a 4 p.m. deadline, but while the board office is open.
But we don't have a formal SOP or anything sort of.
Not otherwise written down, no.
Because I was gonna say, I mean, I'm in favor of this, but if this is gonna be the policy, we should just use a policy, right, end of business day or something, as opposed to even really care that it's after 4.
I guess it's just one of the benefits of my long-standing position, sitting in a chair like this, that, again, I originally put what I would always refer to as my bureaucrat hat on. And said that's a violation, good cause, in the first commission.
So here's no violation, right?
These are no violations.
Right, so it's kind of anyway, not a big deal. Thank you.
Nope, good question.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Any other questions on the two cases before us, 2024 R-369 and 2024 R-384? If not, we still need to take a vote, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Lyle. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved by a vote of 7-0. Next is case number 2024 R-385. Mr. Richter.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, first off, the respondent in this case, Carol Thornhill, is present. So if the commission wanted to hear from her, we could certainly do so. If you look at my recommendation sheet, she submitted the referral by the board was that she made a contribution to a 501c type of organization for which she serves with it somehow. I don't have the materials here in front of me. I can get them. The board commission issued an advisory opinion at one point saying that as long as there was no benefit to a person who was on the board of a 501c, that such a contribution was appropriate. She was not on the board. I think she was the chair, president, principal officer. She submitted a response, though, that stated that, that she was serving, but as an unpaid person on the board. And so my recommendation is to find a violation based on complaint and her response. I'll be glad to answer any questions that the commission wanted to hear from Ms. Thornhill. She could come to the podium and address the commission.
And Ms. Thornhill will need to
You
be
need to be sworn.
sworn in.
Yes. So if you have any questions, I am here to answer them.
Would you can just go ahead and make a statement similar to what you put in your writings,
Oh.
commission members, if you wanted to do so.
I am on the board of Global Together, which is a 501c3 church. I put the leftover money, it's like $1,300 or $1,400 into there, donated it to them, but like he said, I'm unpaid. I don't take any personal money. In fact, I contribute a lot of money to Global Together and I don't get any benefit. I didn't get reimbursed for any personal receipts. So when I looked at the rules on how to dispose of the money, it said you're allowed to do it to a 501c3.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the witness? Thank you. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion
Um,
to accept the executive director's recommendation.
Thank you
There's
very,
no violation.
thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. That's a vote of 7-0 to go along with the recommendation of no violation. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And next, we're going to move to, do we have any other?
Do I need to,
No, you're done.
Anything else?
Thank you very much. Sir, are you Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
Okay, we're about to call your case up, so if you want to come to the podium. I'll just go ahead. Madam Chair, members of the commission, this is case number 2024 R-363, Allison Nelson Floyd. She was referred for late filing. For a late filing of the 2024 post-primary report due on April 26th. It was filed on May 30th. You'll see it, I have it under the to be determined category because we didn't have a response, so I couldn't make I could have made a recommendation. Mr. Floyd had indicated to Mr. Hughes that he was going to attend today's meeting. And so I held off making a recommendation until he was here. If you would be sworn, you could make a statement to the commission. Mr. Floyd.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, go right ahead, Mr. Floyd.
Thank you. Due to, we're in the process of moving, the file got put into the wrong pile. And as a result, it wasn't available. We tried to redo the file, but subsequently found it in the those files. And as a result, we were late.
Are there any questions of Mr. Floyd? If not, is there a motion? Recommendation?
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Go ahead.
may I ask this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, considering if you've got my ICW, you can see the various matters that have been before this commission previously concerning this candidate treasurer in the committee. In April or August of 2023, commission found a violation, imposed a $250 fine. I apologize for not listing that in there. Obviously overlooked it, but it was $250 fine. Based on the fact that he is here, and a statement was made to the commission, but the fact that the report was still late, and considering the history, my recommendation is to find a violation and impose a fine of $500. I'll be glad to answer any other questions that the commission may have.
I would move to accept the executive director's recommendation.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
No.
Okay, there, that is a vote of 6-1.
6-1, correct.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to go to the category of good cause. There are 4 cases, all 2024 are 361, 366, 367, 378. Mr. Executive Director.
The report has been filed in all of these matters. With the filing was made within about actually the report has been filed in all cases. Within about a week, the response submitted to the commission, as I indicated in my kind of outline there, Mr. Carter's explanation in 378 talked about how he essentially got confused from the first time he filed, paid for his filing fee, but then really didn't list it as a campaign expense. Did it this time around, then listed as a campaign expense when he should have paid for it out of check because he didn't have a receipt, et cetera. And so I guess phrasing, give him the benefit of, making a mistake. It's first time before the commission. And so my recommendation on all these matters is to find a violation, but for good cause, not impose a fine. I'll refer the matter for the prosecution.
Are there any questions of our executive director? If not, is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed by a vote of 7-0. The next category of cases is the $50 fine. All of these cases are 2024 R 247, 356, 360, 364, 375, and 376. Mr.
The
Executive Director.
report is, in these cases, the report has been filed within about 2 weeks or earlier of the date when the report was due. A response was submitted giving a basis on which to make a recommendation. And so my recommendation is to find a violation and impose a fine, or I mean, the reports were filed beyond 2 weeks, excuse me, to find a violation and impose a fine of $50.
Are there any questions of the Executive Director? If not, is there a motion?
Move to accept the executive director's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That has been supported by a vote of 7-0. The next category is the $100 fine category. There's one case, 2024 R-368. Mr. Executive Director.
The report was filed, but no response was submitted, so I don't have a basis on which to make a further recommendation. I guess I'd say more beneficial to the respondent. And so my recommendation is to find a violation and impose a fine of $100.
Yes, Ms. Vice Chair.
May I ask the executive director how late the report was
Give me a second.
and if it was never the first time?
It was 3 days late. Due on April, it was for a late post-primary. It was due on April 26th, filed on April 29th.
Any further questions of the Executive Director?
Madam Chair, just to confirm, there was no response.
That is correct.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to accept the recommendation of the executive director.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That has been supported by a vote of 7-0. The next category of case, one case, 2024 R-357. Mr. Executive Director, this is a $150 fine.
This case, the commission found a violation, I'm sorry. I need to change my recommendation on this one, looking more closely. The report was filed, no response was submitted to the commission. It was 1 day late, and my recommendation of a $150 fine would be inappropriate. So my recommendation on changing it to the imposition of a $100 fine. The report was filed, but no response was submitted on which I could make a recommendation to the commission.
Are there any questions of the Executive Director?
Madam Chair,
Yes, please go right ahead.
Ms. Director, you said that there was no response, but the report was filed, but then I see there was one prior violation. Can you give me the date of that?
The commission acted on that on June 30 of 2022.
And so can I ask why your recommendation is to reduce the $50 difference?
In my original action, I just kind of, the standard would be with no response submitted to not only double it, but then add $50 because no response. But then as I just look at it a little more closely here today, the report was only 1 day late. Maximum fine for 1 day late is $100.
Thank you.
So I apologize for not recognizing that earlier as I should have.
Any other questions of the Executive Director on this case? If not,
Madam Chair, if I may too, I would just add, looking at it, that she did have one fine, but she had paid her fine also.
Correct.
So I think that's added into that decision.
Mhm.
is there a motion?
I'll move the executive director's recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, that has been supported by a vote of 7-0. The next category of cases, there are three, all 2024 are $25 a day with reconsideration option. The first one is 359, 372, and 373. Mr. Executive Director.
Relatively simple in terms, the report has not yet been filed. It's the first referral for each matter, and so my recommendation is to find a violation and impose a fine of $25 per day with reconsideration option.
Any questions of the Executive Director? If not, is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. That has been supported by a vote of 7-0. The next case, 2024 R-358, consolidate with case number 2023 R-470, find a violation and impose a fine of $25 a day with reconsideration option. Mr. Executive.
Yeah, I'm recommending that we reconsolidate this with a prior matter for the commission. It's still outstanding. Find a violation and impose a fine of $25 per day because neither report has been filed to this point.
Any questions of the Executive Director? If not, is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? If not, that has been supported by a vote of 7-0. The next category is $25 a day with reconsideration option with the payment of $250. There's one case, 2024 R-382. Mr. Executive Director.
This is actually the third referral. Had multiple referrals. The commission first acted on this in 2023. The report was first initially a failure to file the 23 annual. It was filed. We imposed a fine of $50. That has not yet been paid. Then the 23 annual report and an addendum have subsequently not been, I guess the 23 annual, no, the semi-annual wasn't complete. But there are reports outstanding. And so my recommendation is to consolidate the matters, find a violation, and impose a fine of $25 per day until the report is filed. And give them the ability to have the matter reconsidered if they pay a $250 fine.
And Mr. Executive Director, I did notice that there were some fines levied on the prior case and they haven't been paid yet. Is that
That
correct?
is correct.
Any other questions of the Executive Director? If not, is there a motion?
I'll move to accept the recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? If not, that has been supported by a vote of 7-0. The next category is $19,700 plus $100 a day with reconsideration option. This is case 2024 R-365. Mr. Executive Director.
This is a matter out of Cuyahoga County that has a rather checkered history before the commission dating back a number of years. And so they're back again for having failed to file the 2023 annual report. My recommendation is find a violation and impose a fine of $19,700 plus $100 a day into the future, but give them the opportunity to have the matter reconsidered if the report is filed and a request for reconsideration is made. I'd be glad to answer any other questions the commission may have.
Are there any questions? If not, is there a motion? It's been moved. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. It's been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? If not, that has been approved by a vote of 7-0. The next case, 2024 R-370, has been recommended to be continued on the request of the Board of Elections. Mr. Executive Director, anything else you want to say?
No, the board just reached out and said they're working with the candidate to get the filings completed and submitted. Actually, I think it was Tuesday when, or no, it was yesterday. The candidate reached out concerning, well, I filed the report. I don't know that I've got enough time to get the response in. That's, well, I just get Betty, tell her, get your response in, put it back at some point in the future. Supposedly the report's been filed, but at this point it's being continued. She's going to get a response in, and we'll deal with it. Probably not at the next meeting, but at a September meeting, as long as the reports, or as long as the responses. And then all the rest of the matters on the next page, Madam Chair, are, well, at least for a while, are continued for service.
And so we can just continue.
Correct. You have the ability.
2024R, and then I'll read into the record the others who are continued for service. And they are all 2024R. The numbers are 352, 353, 354, 355, 362, 371, 374, 377, 379, 380, and 381. Oh, one more, and 383. All of those are continued for service. The next is reconsideration. We're going to move the one that's noted as a $50 fine down with the hearing, right before the hearing. So we're going to reconsideration number 3 on the agenda. Reconsider the matter, vacate the previous imposition of a per diem fine and instead impose a fine of $500. This is case 2024R114. Mr. Executive Director.
Yeah, excuse me, the reports have been filed finally, and a series of them, because if you look at the prior matters, there were a series of reports that were not filed. I talked with staff at the Butler County Board of Elections. They're glad to have this group in compliance. This treasurer submitted a request for reconsideration. I've synopsized the submission. There wasn't an issue on the committee or on the ballot for a while, so they did not believe a report was required. They've now filed those reports. This treasurer has asked to be dismissed or removed from the matters. I think a subsequent treasurer has been appointed. That's all interesting and good, but my recommendation, though, as you can see, is to go ahead and reconsider this matter. Vacate the previous impositions of the per diem fine and instead impose a fine of $500.
Are there any questions of the Executive Director? If not, is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll move the matter based on Mr. Richards' recommendation.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That has been supported by a vote of 7-0. The next category is the advisory opinion. Mr. Richter.
I've circulated it to everybody. You may or may not recall, well, actually, Doris, you certainly wouldn't recall, you weren't there. At the last meeting, as the commission, as I presented the fact that the ongoing appeals of the case that led to this advisory opinion, we finally resolved at the Supreme Court level, and the essential action that the commission, I believe, is undertook as part of that finding. The commission suggested putting it into an advisory opinion, and so that's what I've done, is try to take those basic facts of that case, outlining the basis for what the commission decided at that time, and put in an advisory opinion that essentially says, if you have a certain awareness or understanding, a reasonable belief that there is an expenditure out there, even if you have not gotten a billing for it, that you are obligated to put something in your campaign finance report as a debt or another obligation. And so that's the essential holding that's in that advisory opinion. I've gotten some comments back after my original draft was about the 10th one that I went through. And a couple of the members suggested adding some language in about best efforts, which if you look at the revised one that I sent out yesterday, in the concluding paragraph, which is what I then take to put into the syllabus of the case, which is the essential holding. In the last couple of sentences, I changed and added language concerning best efforts so that it now reads, the amount reflected must be a reasonable approximation based on the factual situation, and best efforts must be employed to assure compliance. This will ensure that the report is complete and accurate as required in Ohio's campaign finance law. I'm comfortable with the advisory opinion as I have written it. I see Mr. Katz sitting out there. He and I had a conversation. He and I had a broad conversation yesterday on a variety of subjects. He may be interested in speaking to the commission as it relates to this. I had an email exchange with Mr. McTighe concerning certain elements to this, to which I responded. But I'm comfortable and satisfied with the opinion. If the commission has any other changes to it, certainly we could continue to make changes. I'm not saying we have to adopt it today. But I believe it's an appropriate statement based on what the commission decided and is beneficial. So I'll be glad to answer any other questions. If the commission wants to hear from Mr. Katz, we can certainly do so.
Are there any questions of the executive director before we ask Mr. Katz if he wants to share some comments? Mr. Katz.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Commissioners.
morning.
Ryan Katz from the Ohio Secretary of State's office. Our office appreciates the Executive Director sent us a copy of the draft advisory opinion planned for today. However, the Secretary is still out on military duty right now, and we were not able to seek his input on our proposed feedback. And so in light of the potential impacts to candidate reporting requirements and our office's need to issue guidance and continue to give guidance on this matter, we request respectfully that you table the vote on this until your next meeting so that we have time to adequately prepare and discuss internally for its implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. Anybody have any questions?
Madam Chair, I have no issue, just FYI, waiting for feedback from the Secretary's office.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I agree. I'd like a little time to review it in more detail myself. I'd move that we table the matter for consideration until our next meeting.
Been moved. Is there a second?
You want to hear from Mr. Hicks? I mean,
It's totally up to you.
it's up to
Commissioners,
else on.
want to hear from?
My thought is that we've already moved and we can revisit the issue at the next meeting if anybody would like to address.
We have a motion. Is there,
Yeah, there's a motion, but it hasn't been
it hasn't been
seconded.
seconded, right?
The motion is to table, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, I think Mr. Caraway just seconded it.
I'm fine with that. Oh, Mr. Caraway did, okay,
Yeah. Mhm.
all right.
It's been moved and properly second to table the advisory opinion until our next meeting. All in favor? Opposed? It has been supported by a vote of 7-0. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go into, thank you. We're going to go to case number 2024R-314. This is the $50 fine. And I think
He's over that way.
Oh,
Mr.
yes.
Caraway, I believe, is going to recuse himself.
correct.
He and I have had a brief conversation about this, and considering the ongoing circumstance and the fact that he may end up being a witness in the hearing today, we agreed that the most appropriate approach was for him to recuse himself from consideration of the following matter. So he is doing so. Mr. Stoutberg is now present to replace him.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Stoutberg. Okay, Mr. Executive Director, do you want to take that case? This
Yes,
is
case
the,
number 2024R-314, Hicks for Better Claremont. This is a referral from the from the Claremont County Board of Elections for a late filing of the 2023 annual report. The report was due, I apologize for not, I notice it's not in here. I think it's February 28th was when the actual report was filed. A response was submitted. I circulated it to all of you. My recommendation, kind of on a standard operating procedure, basis for, referrals of this type where where the report, easy for me to say, was submitted after about 2-week period, is to find a violation and impose a fine of $50. You're comfortable with that recommendation? You obviously have the response already. The commission wanted to hear further from Mr. Hicks. He is present, and he can be sworn, and address the commission if that's the commission's preference.
Anyone have any objections? If not, Mr. Hicks, if you would go to the podium, please, and be sworn in. Thank you, Mr. Hicks.
Well, I'd just like to address this. Hopefully you've reviewed this. The case situation is where I mailed in a designation of treasurer that was booked by the Board of Elections on December 27th. I didn't get any notice, even confirmed by their own response, their own complaint. I got no notice that there was a requirement to file an annual report for the prior year. But because it got recorded on December 27th, apparently that's a requirement. But I don't believe that per, 35-1711 B2 by their own admission, I received notice because they had sent a certified letter. I've received my mom, I was out of the state. My mom takes pictures every day religiously and sends me everything that came in the mail, which you can see in my filing, even notices of certified mail that wasn't picked up. Never received such notice. It wasn't until February 20th that I got a notice from the Board of Elections, again, by my mom picking up the certified mail tag and then me contacting the Board of Elections on the same day I got the information from them. That's the first time I knew that I was supposed to file a report for January 31st for a 2023 annual. That report is in there, what they filed, which is a page of all zeros. I think in my response, I put some things about the statutes. I think they're very confusing as to when a report is required and not required. And you can look at those and read those. They actually seem to be contradictory in places where they say not required, but a statement is required in two different places. I want to also point out that the actual complaint from the Board of Elections never references what statute I violated, which per your own rules 37-1-02 A2E, any complaint from a Board of Elections has to be cross-referenced to the statute that was violated by the person, which there's no reference to a statutory violation. It is what it is. The report was not in on January 31st. You guys know me enough to know that had I known or thought there was a report due on January 31st, or had I received notice that a report was due, which I did not, I would have absolutely filed it, especially a report that's nothing but a page of zeros on it. So I would ask that either there be a finding of no violation, or that, I don't know if this applies to you guys, but it's dismissed and they could refile it, actually referencing what they allege that I violated statutorily, or that there would be a hearing on this so that we can go through the statutes and look at what they actually say and where they are contradictory in terms of a situation of an annual report when there has been no activity involved in a campaign. So this thing is very, obviously I pride myself on the rules and following the rules, but that works both ways. And when I did not receive notice, how could I know? And by reading the statutes, I didn't believe that was required. And the more I think about it, I put in my response that just in passing on unrelated matters, I talked to two boards of elections where one of them brought up something like this. So I asked them, what would you do in this situation? And it ended up both of the boards of elections said like, well, we feel like we have discretion and this never would have been an issue. Further, had it not been 3 weeks till I received notice, I would have filed the day I received notice. If they would have told me on February 1st, I would have filed as soon as I could. I was out of state. And I just want to point out how the practice is different. I received a notice about semi-annual reports from the Board of Elections in Claremont County. Then I got a call from them telling me to disregard the notice, that I didn't actually have to file them, that they made a mistake. Then I called back and talked to the executive director to make sure that, not the executive, the director of our Board of Elections, to make sure I understood correctly on this notice. What's interesting is things like this, it's very easy. It's not like, Cuyahoga County or something. Everybody knows each other. And I feel like part of this is there should have been some discretion on the part of the director and the Board of Elections. I'm not very popular in Claremont County, so they look for things like this on me. But again, I would ask that there be no violation, or that they dismiss it, it gets dismissed and they refile it with an actual code that is required by your own rules, actually a reference to what code I violated within the complaint, or that there be a full hearing on this. So we can go through the statutes. And I think if you read my response, you can see where the statutes in their own wording would be highly confusing. And also factoring in the lack of notice to me that there was a requirement to filing, which is required under statute. So I appreciate the time and hearing me out on this. And any questions?
Members of the commission, any questions of Mr. Hicks?
I just do with the executive director. If I may.
Yeah,
Madam Chair.
please go right ahead.
Mr. Richter, I want to make sure that I'm clear here. 351710 dictates when the statements must be filed. That I
That's correct. And then 13 says, you know, I,
fair to use of apply.
yeah,
Is notification to the candidate required?
a
Prior to
board,
filing?
a board has an obligation to notify, under 351711, I think it is.
And if that's not done appropriately, does that dispense with the need for the candidate to?
Honestly, we've never discussed, honestly, we've never discussed that set of circumstances. It's something I have taken into consideration, in the past, depending on the nature of the, you know, who the individual is, what has been their experience in campaign finance, in the campaign finance area, et cetera. And there is an and I don't know, in this particular case, there's an obligation or an opportunity, I should say, not an obligation, an opportunity for a candidate to waive certified mail notice with the board.
Let me ask you.
There's a
more
lot of
things
things
if I could.
that factor into a situation like that.
Does anything that's been presented here today alter your recommendation?
No, I'm comfortable with my recommendation. With all due respect to Mr. Hicks, he's very experienced in the campaign finance area. He has had campaign finance, or he had run in the past, knows when campaign finance reports, I think, are obligated and should be filed. And so that's certainly a part of what I've taken into consideration as I'm making my recommendation.
Understood. Thank you.
May I make an additional comment?
Go right ahead.
Is I think it's the campaign, the executive director making representations up to my mind. I do think I know a lot of the rules, and I know that the rule requires per statute that there be notice to the candidate. And it's to 351711B2. Your own rule also requires, and if you look at the actual complaint, that the prima facie violation be cross-referenced to relevant revised code sections. The complaint against me doesn't reference what code section I supposedly violated. It has verbiage of a complaint, so I'm familiar with that too. I think in these cases, that for Mr. Richter to say, well, Chris Hicks knows the rules, so he should do it. I do think I generally know the rules. And my read of the statutes was that it was not required to be filed. There was no activity from the last time that Hicks for Better Claremont had been active. It was active and inactive. There had been no activity. So I think when one reads the statutes, when there's no activity, there's no requirement. But the statutes are confusing. If you go read them, they seem to contradict themselves because they talk about you don't have to file, but you have to file a statement within a couple of different statutes. But the key point here is I did not receive, by their own, not me saying it, the Board of Elections complaint against me says I didn't receive notice of the requirement to file. And certainly Mr. Richter knows that had I received notice, I would have absolutely filed, especially a page that's all zeros, because there was no activity. So, either way, then I would seriously request that there be a hearing on this and that I get the benefit of due process and the Board of Elections come here and explain. And an issue that Mr. Richter just said he has never, thought about is whether the failure to notify the candidate has an effect on their complaint status and their filing status. So for example, when I had been called by the Board of Elections to tell me I don't need to file this, the semi-annual, then if they turn around and say, I do need to file the semi-annual, do I have any recourse or any defense? So I think this should be then a full hearing, so that these issues can be resolved. And the issue that Mr. Richter, who has much more experience than me, just said he's never thought about whether the requirement in statute 351711B2 that there be notice to the candidate would have an impact on the ability to have a complaint against the candidate. But thank you.
Any questions of the witness or the executive director? If not, is there a motion? Any comments, discussion? Your executive director, are you still of the mindset for the $50 fine?
I am, excuse me, I am. I mean, I appreciate what Mr. Hicks is saying, and there are times when I say it can be confusing. I wouldn't necessarily argue with that. Alternatively, my own humble opinion, he is an experienced person in the campaign finance area. And also, I knew it was there somewhere in 351710. Should have done. There is a line in 351710. If a campaign committee or political action committee has no balance on hand, no outstanding obligations into others terminate. Can't find it at the moment, but there is an obligation to file something, I should say, if you haven't had any activity. And that oftentimes catches up people who have filed the waiver. In terms of they think of once they file the waiver, no obligation to do anything else. Well, if you even if you don't have any activity, or if you don't do something after you file the waiver, you've got an obligation to file something with the Board of Elections that reflects activity or inactivity. It's the case, I believe that that's also appropriate here.
Madam Chair, this is Mr. Richter. So the report was due 1/31. And when did Mr. Hicks actually file it?
The board, February 29th.
February 29th. Okay. And he's never had he's never had a violation before, right?
That is correct.
There's no priors. Based on his explanation, I'm going to make a motion that we move the $50 to good cause violation.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor? Opposed?
No.
It's been, the recommendation has been supported by a vote of 6-1. Okay, now we're going to move into the hearing. Mr. Richter, do you want to start? And these are individual or combined?
They are combined. The commission consolidated them at a previous preliminary review. We have two cases that Mr. Hicks filed against Representative Stewart's campaign committee concerning the omission of certain campaign and finance activity. I guess let's put it that way. And so that's what we're here to hear for.
And those two cases are 2022 -004 and 2022 G-015.
Correct.
So we're going to start with Mr. Hicks.
Get a second to set up. And where are witnesses going to sit?
I will have to adjust that table. I'm gonna move it up so it's within the camera.
While Mr. Hicks and our team member from the commission are setting up, does anyone need a break?
That'd be great. Sure.
5 minutes would be good.
Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. You are quite welcome.
Yes, yeah, your exhibit.
I guess we're gonna be
Printed one.
You might want to move it on the other side. I had to put it there only because of that. Well, no, it's so steep. It's just that. I mean, if you need to move that in, I don't care. I've only made a couple of, so if you have, yes, I'd say circulate, please, thank you.
Presenter, okay, so if I go presenter, I can go presenter, presenter two.
I like being C-SPAN.
We are like Opia and the spectrum,
So
like
it's all the way zoomed.
there's stuff in the room that governors, that's all the furniture in, we're down in the C-SPAN room. So they're not a.
Oh,
okay, never mind.
Hey, Phil. That works. Now.
Upgrade drones in your spare time.
What's that?
Upgrade drones.
Oh, I tell you. All right, we're good.
There, whatever. Just fine. I'm concerned.
Seconds, so that I can adjust the camera and pan it over. Just give it a second. So.
Yeah. Relatively, yes, I think we'll probably have opening statements from the. No, that makes sense. I appreciate it. I'm presuming are you gonna call Ms. Fitzmartin early in your case, Mr. Hicks?
Yes.
Yeah. No statement, 3 or 4 shall be required. It's not as statements. Send a letter. I have.
But per 11B2, you have to get notice. That's a requirement upon the Board of Elections to provide you notice.
Like I said, yeah, I know there's also an opportunity, which you probably didn't do, but you haven't, boards will often have people accept out, sending out certified mail notice, just send regularly.
But I didn't, so
I said,
that doesn't take away that requirement statutorily. Can I do an administrative appeal on that to the Common Pleas Court, or does it go reconsideration here?
No, that would have to go to the conference.
Okay.
How long is your opening statement, you think?
What do you want me to say? 72
I'm gonna
minutes.
try to be shorter. I think we should compete to see who's short.
Who can be shortest?
Yeah, I'm all for that. I got one page.
I am all for that competition. In fact, I think that should be the entire theme of the hearing.
Especially since we all showed up for a 10 o'clock hearing.
I had a feeling, and Natalie told me.
They're usually much late. This is like a super fast meeting. The hearings usually start like at noon or 1.
It's another one.
It's another one that just showed up.
This is Mr. Stewart's, right? Because it's New Maryland. Mr. Zink has to be on.
Most of the stuff in his was the same stuff as in mine.
Right.
So it's a repeat.
Have they ever done, like, you guys ever do joint stipulations in these things? Have you ever done that? That would
In
be-
the Freeman thing, there was something like that. There was an actual.
I was gonna say we're both.
All exhibits needed to be submitted in advance and all that kind of stuff.
I did.
It was like 2 weeks in advance of the actual hearing, all these.
Told my son, I'm like, go busy.
And, but the other thing, I don't know if Chris sent it, but I
Give it a
sent
shot, come on.
It was like
a PDF that has everything bookmarked.
Yeah.
So if I said go to this, and that, like what I'm looking at here, you can click on any
Must be a certain kind.
particular exhibit instantly. The director said you guys like to take notes on the exhibits,
I do.
but I'm betting most of the
You have to
pages of the
read.
exhibits end up in the
How old are you?
trash file and ultimately.
Well, it's basically for me, I use them.
Sorry, I almost squeezed past you again. I'm sorry.
I review the actual video.
Is this room gonna have way better video too of the meetings?
It appears, I don't know, ask
I
Chris.
know it's streaming.
I don't know that it's, we only had what, one other meeting here? I haven't looked on that particular video to see how it was. This is storage here.
She can become testifying.
Stewart served in Iraq, earning the
But I gave you guys two has page numbers at the bottom, so because there'll be confusion later. It's like a bluish, so I might bring reference to those.
But things are gonna.
I'm learn slowly from not having done it in the past, or done it after things got distributed.
Good see you.
Oh, yes, that's. I hope. Because I can. Sorry, didn't mean to return. Just let me know if you don't want those, I can don't put your screen share. That's fine as well. So
You could potentially, give me a second.
Can you share these computers? Because there's plugs for video.
What's that?
At each of these tables, there's a plug for video.
There is, and so, and here, I'll just. You want to use it as. If such is the case, I think,
You want to put this on the podium?
we don't have an extra one. We just put the one here for,
Okay.
when she speaks or they speak.
I think
Let me see if,
mostly from the podium.
so you've got your computer's plugged in, correct, to the.
I don't have the
The
video cable
HDMI?
plugged in, but I noticed the video cable.
Yeah, there's an HDMI. Try it real quick, because if such is the case, I might be able to put yours up so you're 100% or two. Bear with me a moment. Yeah. Speak up. Can you take the? Yeah, you can take that with you.
Yeah.
I apologize. This is all new. This is our first meeting with all this stuff working, and so trial by fire, you know? Hicks, is that your screen?
If it is.
Okay, so I can put that on as well. So if you need it on the screen, just let me know. I can put it on to Teams so it'll be visible.
I have his exhibits also, so I can put those on there. on
I've
my
got
computer.
both sets of exhibits up on mine as well.
And just let me know when you're ready and I'll,
You distribute the PDF I sent to them
Yes.
because it has bookmarks. If you open it up, it's all bookmarks. It's easy to navigate.
yeah, I think he forwarded everything.
You're ready?
Sounds like.
Yes, we are.
The right attitude.
Peter, turn your phone off. You're embarrassing us.
You want me to should we take the microphone up to the podium with us?
Yeah, it might be the easiest because we didn't have an extra.
Okay.
I've got a better chance. of
Thank you,
winning
Mr. Hicks.
than a Powerball 4 times each in a month.
Okay, we're resuming our committee meeting. Mr. Hicks?
So I've been challenged by Representative Stewart and his colleague to have a brief opening statement, so I'll try to do that. I filed report, it slows it down when people smirk when I say that. I filed 2 reports in this matter. I think I'll be able to prove the allegations in both reports very clearly and very convincingly today that relate to failure to complete an accurate statement, failure to keep a strict accounting of contributions, and acceptance of direct corporate contributions. So just as a quick layout, this all emerged because I had combed some invoices relating to the 2020 primary involving strategy and media and found an invoice that had approximately 6 candidates on it. And as you know, all those candidates on that invoice that had no reporting of financial expenses to strategy and media or constant content. These are all Larry Householder era things that I have pursued. So those have been 3. I won't name the names. This is one of them. I have pursued because of the fact that there was nothing on their campaign finance reporting that seemed to reflect the activities that were being performed on their campaigns related to the Larry Householder team or organization. So there's a reason why there's 2 complaints. The first complaint related to media because the original invoice that I had found where there was nothing on the campaign finance report related to radio advertising, production and radio advertising. When Mr. Stewart filed a response to that, he talked about print media, which was different than what my actual complaint was about. And then I dug into that and found out there was a whole print media element of it that had not been reported. And that's what the second complaint are. They're both tied together, same organization, same campaign. And so today I'll take you through the facts on it and I think pretty convincingly show that there was a failure to report things. And as we know, you might not have passed an advisory opinion today, but the matters associated with these kind of things have already now been through the appeals court and rejected for further consideration by the Supreme Court. So that is my opening statement. Thank you.
Members of the commission, my name is Brian Stewart. I'm one of the respondents. I'm also representing the respondents' legal counsel, and I would like to introduce my co-counsel, Attorney Brian Garvine, who will be helping in the presentation of our case today. I've served in public office for the last 15 years as a councilman for the Village of Asheville, as Pickaway County Commissioner, and I'm now in my second term as state representative for Ohio's 12th District. I've been an attorney in private practice for 14 years. I am an infantry veteran of the Iraq War. And across 10 consecutive winning campaigns, my campaign committee has filed literally dozens and dozens of campaign finance reports across those various campaigns, none of which have ever been cited for any inaccuracies or any deficiencies by any actual reviewing authority at either the county level or the state level, including the reports that are the subject of Mr. Hicks' complaints today. Moreover, the complainant has never been my constituent. He has never spoken to me prior to this case, and he lives in a community that is 100 miles from the nearest edge of my district. I also want to note, based on some testimony from earlier today, I find it incredible that Mr. Hicks just argued to you in the immediately preceding matter that he should not be held liable for a reporting deficiency because he didn't receive notice that a report was due. He is arguing in our case to hold us to the exact opposite standard after 2.5 years. That's fascinating to me. Now, the complainant has already disclosed the minuscule amount of evidence that he actually has for you today. Paints a very clear picture. There is not one shred of evidence that Friends of Brian Stewart was ever made aware of any ad buy being made for a radio ad. There is no evidence that the committee was ever informed that such ad was running. There's no evidence that any invoice or any other form of notice was given to the committee after the ad ran. And there's also no evidence that any entity who allegedly ran the radio ad ever reported that ad as an in-kind expenditure to Friends of Brian Stewart or anybody else. In the same vein, there's no evidence that any mailers were sent in support of Friends of Brian Stewart, which were not properly accounted for on all the committee's campaign finance reports. There's no evidence of any invoice being sent to Friends of Brian Stewart for any alleged unpaid debt prior to the filing of the committee's 2020 campaign finance reports. And so complainant's position is that even if a committee is entirely unaware of an alleged in-kind contribution, the committee breaks the law by not reporting the expenditure which it admittedly knew nothing about. In other words, not only must candidates comply with a mountain of pretty complex campaign finance regulations, but they have to be psychic as well. Complainant's position is that a committee must also report bogus, unsubstantiated demands for payment from cranks, grifters, and in this case, literally, a vendor who was under pending indictment for racketeering, money laundering, and fraud. His position is we have to report that as a valid debt, no questions asked, on the campaign finance reports. Commissioners, that is absurd. If his pleadings to this point are any indication, the complainant is going to refer to other candidates from prior cases have been before this commission who were also candidates in the 2020 Republican primary. Both these other candidates worked with the campaign operation for the former sitting Speaker of the House. But commissioners, that is where the similarities to my case end. There is a massive distinction between the candidates in those other races because I was endorsed in the 2020 Republican primary by the Ohio Republican Party. Those other candidates, Alan Freeman and Gene Schmidt, I'll say the names so we're all on the same page for the record. Those candidates were not endorsed by the state party. And this is hugely significant because it means that everything sent out in support of Friends of Brian Stewart was sent by the Ohio Republican Party, marked, paid for by the Ohio Republican Party, not Friends of Brian Stewart. The Ohio Republican Party then reported all of those expenditures in furtherance of my campaign as in-kind contributions. Friends of Brian Stewart then properly reported all those in-kind expenditures by the Ohio Republican Party on our own campaign finance reports. Friend Brian Stewart got a benefit from being endorsed by the party because the state party sends mail at a vastly discounted rate compared to a normal candidate committee. And so there is no incentive, there's no reason for Friends of Brian Stewart to have ever sent mail ourselves at double the rate that it was going to be sent by the state party. To be clear, Ohio Republican Party produced the mailers, they sent the mailers, not Friend of Brian Stewart. Complainant knows all this. That's why his entire case to this point has been about inferences, hunches, assumptions, accusations in search of fact. He has the burden to prove his own claims with actual evidence, not just conjecture. And we look forward to rebutting those claims, and we thank you for your attention.
Mr. Hicks brings his case.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Is Nelson Embry present?
He is not.
Okay, and who is he represented by?
Represented by us.
So if you're pro se representing yourself, you cannot represent another party in the same matter,
Sure I can.
not according to courts in Ohio.
It's not true.
You may have adverse interest.
I'm not going to debate with the complainant. I mean, this has been pending for 2.5 years. We're representing all the respondents. Respondents extended to be represented by our firm.
Mr. Hicks, do you want to go forth with your case?
Yes, I'm going to call myself first.
Well, why don't you go to the, you're probably better off over this.
We'll go, and I forgot to take my microphone back. I don't know if I turned it on. So I have the exhibits, so I'll be referencing exhibits and I'll be correcting myself too. So the first question I asked myself is just to provide a background on how these complaints came about. And I would refer myself to Exhibit A, and I'll refer you to Exhibit A, which is in the pack that I sent. At the bottom of each page, there's page numbers in kind of a blue color. I'm colorblind, so. And so I'll correct page 2 in that blue numbering is the beginning of the Exhibit A. So my explanation of how this came about is that there were 5 candidates that were on an invoice that is on page 6, which is Exhibit 1 within Exhibit A. Those 5 candidates all had activities that were billed to, as you will see from that invoice, constant content.
1 second, Mr.
Yeah, he was sworn in earlier today. Just a reminder that you've been sworn.
So those 5 candidates in my original complaint, if you go back to Exhibit 3, I did an analysis of those 5 candidates and began an investigation to build my personal knowledge on what had happened with each of them. So 2 of them, Tom Young and Lampton, showed expenses related to constant content. And therefore, I've not done anything with them. The other 3, I investigated further to figure out what had actually happened. That investigation involved looking at the campaign finance reports, which are part of that Exhibit A, and of Brian Stewart, and finding that there were no within those campaign finance filings, there were no references to any billings to constant content, to strategy and media, or to any such entities. I filed the complaint at that point in time. If you look at what in my file is Exhibit B, starting on page 23, based on the numbers down at the bottom, Exhibit B, Mr. Stewart had responded and provided a copy to me, which is on page 32, of a letter from him responding to attorney David Goldstein about a request from David Goldstein for some $13,000 in payment associated with work that had been done by Constant Content for Mr. Stewart's campaign. The next complaint, the second complaint, which is starting on page 33, is because of the Mr. Stewart raising the print items caused me to file a second complaint around the print items. He subsequently produced, if you go back to Exhibit D, which is the page number is labeled it's B47, page 47. I think it's a little bit blocked out by the actual mailers on there, but it's the first one that's a mailer. A set of mailers that are all labeled as paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart, not labeled as paid for by Ohio Republican Party, again produced by Mr. Stewart in this matter. So the second part of the complaint is that these mailers were also something never shown on a campaign finance report. Mr. Stewart got up here and made some statements. So I'm going to question myself on those statements. Am I holding Mr. Stewart to an opposite standard of what I just argued a few minutes ago? Not at all. I was talking about notice statutorily required by a Board of Elections for the filing of a candidate report. Mr. Stewart is talking about something that he was involved with. He produced the mailers to me. He knew what was going on. He knew there were activities taking place. In a minute, I'm going to play a radio ad that he's the voiceover at the end of the radio ad. But he claims he knew nothing about this. There was nothing to report. There was nothing to investigate. The second thing I would ask myself is that he made a statement, Mr. Stewart just made a statement, that he was entirely unaware of these activities. I think that that will be belied by, in a moment, me playing the radio ad where he has the voiceover. So what I'd like to do right now is introduce exhibit, the radio ad, which is Exhibit G, which I'll play if it pleasures you all, I'll play the radio ad.
Mr. Hicks, what page do you have?
Exhibit G is, I'm going to play, it's a media file, but it's back on, it says page 59.
Decorated infantry veteran, battle-tested conservative, Brian Stewart will always defend our conservative values. Stewart served in Iraq, earning the Combat Infantryman Badge and the Army Commendation Medal twice for protecting our nation. Here at home, Brian Stewart served as Pickle Lake County Commissioner and opened his own business, growing our economy and creating jobs. At the State House, Stewart will continue to defend our conservative values. That's why Brian Stewart is the only candidate endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party. Stewart will work to cut red tape so we can grow local businesses and create jobs. Brian Stewart's pledge to defend our God-given constitutional rights has earned him an A2 rating from the Buckeye Firearms Association, the highest rating earned by a non-incumbent. And Stewart is committed to protecting innocent life. That's why he's the only candidate endorsed by Ohio Right to Life, a battle-tested conservative who won't back down. Support Brian Stewart for state representative on March 17th.
Paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart.
So I received that copy of that radio ad from Mr. Stewart. And if I direct you back to my original complaint on the blue pages at the bottom, it's Exhibit A, but it's the blue numbers, it's page 6. And you'll see that that invoice contains a line item for $1,100 for radio production for Stewart, and a line item for $9,686 for airtime related to Brian Stewart. So when I developed the complaint, based on its invoice, and then later received a copy of that ad from Brian Stewart, it belies, I thought it belied credibility that some would say they knew nothing of what was going on. Whereas he said it's entirely unaware when you had been personally involved in the production of a radio spot. And if just that When I looked at this invoice, that's $1,100. And that is something that he was aware of, just as I believe from my complaints that he was aware of. I also believe that he was aware of the mailers because he sent me the mailers. He made statements around the Ohio Republican Party. So I would ask myself to comment on those, and do I believe that those have veracity to them? The answer is they don't. He stood up here and said everything the Ohio Republican Party did was labeled Ohio Republican Party. I agree with that. All the mailers that relate to Ohio Republican Party, I think he has a bunch of them in his exhibits. They all say paid for by the Ohio Republican Party. And then he put those on his campaign finance report. I'm not talking about those. And those shouldn't get conflated. That radio ad just ended with paid for by who? Friends of Brian Stewart. The pieces that I've included that came from Brian Stewart of the, which is Exhibit D in the package that I sent you, those mailers. Yeah, the page number for that one is 47. But it's kind of the way the mailer printed. You'll see it's a big mailer. It kind of cut off the page number, so the page number is not visible on those pages, but it would be 47. If you find 46, it's the next page. So I'm talking specifically about those that have nothing to do with the Ohio Republican Party, and I think it was pure conflation on the part of Mr. Stewart to come up here and say that, conflate those issues of Ohio Republican Party versus things that were done in the name of his campaign committee, Friends of Brian Stewart. I didn't call a witness of the ORP, but my experience is they do everything, and Mr. Stewart confirmed, labeled as paid for by the Ohio Republican Party, not paid for by a candidate committee. In terms of the print part of it that I became aware of largely because of Mr. Stewart, in his response to my media complaint, I would ask myself about how did I investigate that further? I had a call with David Goldstein, who is an attorney who was serving as a collection agent for Constant Content. In that call, in the first couple of minutes of that call, we talked extensively. I provide for somebody who had this exhibit from before. We talked extensively about his efforts to collect from Brian Stewart's campaign specific to mailers, not media. It's actually part of the discussion. Not radio, not television, but specifically mailers in that. So that helped to build credibility to me that there was some there in terms of this. We all know that, I think that the 2020 campaign cycle was filled with things that are reprehensible to happen in politics that violate the public trust. And that's why I spent a lot of time driving back and forth, spent a lot of time printing things out, to try to get some of these cases where it's clearer, again, in Mr. Stewart's case, that he was involved in the radio ads personally. He was involved in the mailers personally. He never showed any campaign personal expense, as can be seen in the campaign finance reports. In this matter, he never showed any of these expenses. I would ask myself the question about what else did I do to try to verify the radio part of this. And so I would direct you to Exhibit H, which the page number, which is, I apologize, cut off a little bit, but it's page 60. I tried, I'm getting better with these page numbers. So it's page 60. So what I did is I went out to the FCC database. Those of you might be aware, but everything involving radio and media, involving political campaigns, is warehoused in an FCC database. Very easy to go out there and search on campaigns and pull down the invoices. And candidates can do it. It seems that very few do. I do. And so the section that is Exhibit H, which starts on page 60, these are all the things that are available on the FCC database related to the radio buys that took place within the campaign. And then I want to direct you to Exhibit F, which is on page 54, and the page number is not cut off, so you can read it. And I'll call him later as a witness. He's here. But the organization that did the work on the radio ads was Strategy and Media. In that part, and he should be available for cross-examination. There's a affidavit by Scott Schweitzer that he did this work in conjunction with Constant Content for the battle-tested radio ad for the Brian Stewart campaign, not at the direction of the Ohio Republican Party, but involved with Constant Content. And you've already heard Mr. Stewart being part of the actual radio ad. He further provided invoices that contain Brian Stewart items that are on page 57 and I believe 58. And that's coming from Strategy and Media. There, it's worth noting that within his campaign finance reporting, Mr. Stewart had did a town hall. There was a teletown hall done by Strategy and Media, so he obviously knows somebody in Strategy and Media. Plus, he received a contribution from a person in Strategy and Media to his campaign. This stuff's all easily verifiable. And the reason why I brought the complaint is because I'm sick as a citizen of politicians that get up and claim that they didn't know, I couldn't have known, how could I have known, when it's obvious they should have known. I believe that citizens come in here, including me, who have been citizen candidates and are worried about $50 fines and whether they file it on time. And sometimes there's a bifurcated culture where there's a group that gets away with bloody murder sometimes. And what happens and what's reported that a regular citizen, that would never be an acceptable excuse to say, I was unaware of, I was entirely unaware of a radio ad where I provided voiceover. So those are the main points that I would call myself as a witness, just to set up. I wanted to do that primarily because Mr. Goldstein was not available to testify today, as you guys may be aware. So, you know, he kind of is the start of some of the chain here. So in lieu of him not being able to testify, I thought that I would try to testify myself first and then get a, not excuse myself. I can be cross-examined now because I put myself out to testify, but also not excuse myself so I can be recalled later. I just wanted to set up the parameters and boundaries of this case and what's involved. And when we get past all of the, I'm totally supportive of veterans and all the bravado and all that kind of stuff, but this is a pretty simple thing. And I'm tired of, personally as a citizen, I'm tired of politicians playing dumb, even years after the event. At any time along this path, Mr. Stewart could have revised his campaign finance reports. And he could have walked in here and said, now that I'm aware of these things, I fixed it. But he's coming in with this opposite standard, entirely unaware stuff, and his campaign treasurer is not present, who is the campaign treasurer at the time of these things, because maybe the testimony would be different. That's the end of the testimony I wanted to give at this point, but I'm not excusing myself. Do you want to cross-examine me?
Here
Then we'll have him there and you could go to the podium.
Yeah.
A little bit convoluted, but it works. But we'll make sure, yeah, thank you.
With the commission's permission, just for the record, because I don't want to hide any balls here.
Is your microphone on?
It says green.
Okay.
Yeah. Prior to this case.
Pull a little bit towards you.
Yeah, because
Top of the mic.
Understood. Oh, that is better. Okay. Prior to the hearing today, in preparation, Mr. Hicks indicated that he did not plan to call Nelson Embry as a witness. I indicated that I also did not plan to call Nelson Embry as a witness. Nelson Embry is more than 80 years old. He was not heavily involved in the preparation of the report. He reviewed the report. Obviously, he was the treasurer at a period of time. I don't want to share too much personal information, but there's a health issue that precluded his being here today. And given that both parties had indicated that he would not be called to testify.
I will object. I did not ever indicate that I was not going to call Nelson Embry.
I have the email saying.
Well, you should produce it right now then,
Okay.
because it's false.
That is the reason why Mr. Embry is not here. Can
you produce the email?
I'm going to take my questions now. Thanks.
Well, I object to you putting something in the record that's false.
You can
And
testify.
you can claim
When
it.
it's your turn, you can testify to it.
But I can object also.
Your objection is noted.
Is it sustained?
Not at this point. Just go ahead. Let's get on with the questioning.
Mr. Hicks, where do you live?
444 Woodward Court, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45255.
Have you ever been my constituent?
No.
Have you ever had any interactions with me prior to this case?
Prior to this case, we met when I was trying to advise you to just settle this case and fix your campaign reports. We met at the Starbucks somewhere around Capitol.
The question was, have you ever spoken to me prior to the filing of this case?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. Alan Freeman was another candidate in the 2020 Republican primaries, correct?
Yes.
Gene Schmidt was another candidate in the 2020 primaries, correct?
Yes.
Were those candidates endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with the fact that I was endorsed by the Ohio
Yes.
Republican Party? Please let me finish my questions. We'll have better transcript if you let me finish the question, and then I'll let you finish your answer. Are you aware of what happens when the Ohio Republican Party endorses a candidate in a primary?
I am absolutely aware, including having them testify in multiple hearings before this.
You're aware then that when the Ohio Republican Party endorses a candidate, they send mail on behalf of that candidate, correct?
I am aware that they send mail all labeled as paid for by the Ohio Republican Party, and I find this to be a diversion from the reality of what the case before us is materials that were labeled paid for by the Friends of Brian Stewart.
We'll get to that. This case has been pending since March of 2022. Have you found any evidence that any demand for payment was made to Friends of Brian Stewart by Constant Content prior to the filing of the 2020 campaign finance reports?
I don't remember can I look at my exhibits to see when
You can, it's not in there, but you can look at.
Well, I'm gonna look at see when they were filed because you made representations. So one was filed on March 4th, 2022. And the other one was filed, I think, a couple weeks after that. And can you repeat your question?
The question
I just
was,
want to get the dates down in my head.
do you have any evidence that a payment demand was made to Friends of Brian Stewart by Constant Content prior to the filing of the 2020 campaign finance report?
Yes, I do have that evidence.
What's that?
A letter from your response letter and we can always introduce the recording of me talking to Mr. Goldstein. But my evidence is that in your response, which in my packet of materials is part of Exhibit D. So the page at the bottom is 32.
Mr. Hicks, I don't think you're listening carefully to the question.
I'd like to be able to answer the question. You asked me,
Go
if
ahead.
I'm aware of any attempt to get collection from you from Constant Content.
The question
prior to the
was,
filing of my complaint.
the question was, do you have evidence of a payment demand being made to
Yes.
Friends of Brian Stewart prior to the filing of the 2020 campaign finance report?
No, but your
Okay,
first
thank
question was 2022, the
No,
filing of my complaints.
no, the question
And so
was the
again-
question I asked, and your answer was no.
Okay, so I have direct evidence from you that on September 5th, 2021, you responded to a request for payment on behalf of Constant Content Company by David Goldstein. So I think
Mr. Hicks, what's the date on the letter from Friends of Brian Stewart to David Goldstein?
it's on the letter from Friends of Brian Stewart,
Yeah.
September 5th, 2021.
Okay, can we agree that the campaign finance reports for 2020 had been filed prior to September 5th, 2021?
Yes, and
Okay.
can we also agree that they can be amended to take in new information that becomes visible to the client, to the candidate? Can we agree on that?
The demand for payment was made after the filing of the 2020 campaign finance reports, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
We agree
Okay.
that you have an obligation
If
to
Friends of
correct
Brian Stewart-
campaign finance reporting. That's wrong.
If Friends of Brian Stewart never received a demand for payment from Constant Content prior to the filing of the 2020 campaign finance reports, it would be impossible for the committee to report any such alleged debt, correct?
No, it would go back and revise that report.
Nope, we're not
when it
talking about
became aware.
amendments. We're not
Or
talking
it
about
would
after the fact.
File it on the first report that it became aware of those obligations.
We're not talking about amendments, Mr. Hicks. We're not talking about what you think I should have done 2 years later. The question is, if the committee never got a bill prior to 2020 reports being due, how do they report that bill on the report?
They revise the report once they become aware of the bill. That's
ask
their
the
legal
executive
obligation to
director.
revise their campaign finance filing once they become aware of it.
I would ask the commission and the executive director to instruct the witness to answer the actual question that's been presented.
He's answering the question, but he's just going on his own path. So please
Is that allowed
answer
here?
directly based on the question asked, please.
If Friends of Brian Stewart has simply guessed at a number that it thinks it might have owed to Constant Content, and the committee guessed wrong and filed the report with the wrong number, that would in and of itself have been a violation of campaign finance law, correct?
Fail to see that point because there's two candidates where I never took any action against because I would have no basis to know what they put in their report was the right number or not. The point here is the complete failure to report any number.
Mr. Hicks, that's not the question. It's going to be helpful if you just answer the question. The question is, if the committee, Friends of Brian Stewart, pulled a number out of the sky and said, we think it might be this number, and reported that, and it's wrong, then by your standard, it's still a violation of campaign finance law.
No, it's not by my
correct?
standards. So what's my standard then? You just described it as a violation of my standard. What's my standard?
In the 2.5 years this case has been pending, have you found any evidence of a demand for payment that was made to Friends of Brian Stewart by Strategy Group for Media at all?
Again, some of the work is contained within that because Constant Content is who Strategy and Media was billing to. Constant Content that was then trying to collect from you.
No, the conversation that you've described from Mr. Goldstein, he explicitly says that his demand for payment has nothing to do with radio, correct?
But this case is about two things now, right? Radio and mailers.
Well, let's just go back to the basic question. Anywhere in your 150 or how many odd pages here, do you have any actual evidence that Strategy Group for Media demanded payment directly to Friends of Brian Stewart ever?
No.
Thank you.
Relating to radio, I think that they may or may not have been involved in the print media side. I don't know the answer to that question.
Do you have any evidence in your large package showing that Friends of Brian Stewart approved an actual expenditure for radio ads?
Yes,
Where is it?
that you approved an expenditure for the production of a radio ad by participating in a radio ad's production. Remember, one of the line items on the invoice is the production of the radio ad was $1,100. The airing of the radio ad was $9,600. I would assume by you personally appearing in the radio ad, you had approved at least the production.
You understand there's a difference between producing a piece of campaign material and actually spending money to run it, correct?
I think both have costs and both are reportable on a campaign finance report.
Have you ever heard the phrase in the can? We're going to have something in the can.
Why don't you define the term for me?
Are you aware that sometimes in campaigns, draft mailers, TV ads, B-roll footage, things will be produced that are not actually ever used in the campaign, in which they're not paid, they're not billed, they're not paid for?
I would seek to make clear what I'm aware of. So my wife is a professional artist. She has done many totally volunteer pieces of work for campaigns where she does media creation for them. Nobody ever pays her. She doesn't do it. She's a freelance art person. She's not working in somebody's company while she's getting paid and while she's doing that work. Total volunteer. In that case, when a volunteer does something that's no cost to the campaign, there's nothing to report because there was no cost. We are not talking about that situation here. In this situation, Strategy and Media had paid people making a campaign ad for you, billed $1,100 for just the production. Let's set aside the running of the ad, which it ran, okay? But they paid people for the production of that ad. If that bill was paid by a third party, that's a reportable campaign finance expense. Just like if my wife did advertising, created an ad for a candidate of showing us print stuff, but if she created an ad for a candidate and then a third party paid her for that, for having done that work, that candidate needs to report that. There's a difference between volunteer in the can and a paid person doing work. Clearly, there were people paid because Strategy and Media had an $1,100 bill to Constant Content, who, as per Mr. Schweitzer's affidavit, that bill was paid. It was paid on behalf of your campaign by Constant Content, and you have been aware of that for over 2 years and taken no steps to clean up your campaign finance reports.
Do you have any evidence that Friends of Brian Stewart was shown, hey, here's how much we want to spend to run an radio ad, and the campaign said yes?
I don't even know that that's relevant, but I don't have any evidence of your internal campaign meetings.
Do you have any actual evidence of Friends of Brian Stewart being informed, hey, this radio ad is going to run?
I don't know how that's relevant to you participating in the production of an ad if I focus in on that. But again, how would I have to be aware of your internal campaign meetings and discussions with vendors?
Well, you could have subpoenaed Strategy Group. Do they have any proof? They give you any proof that they had sent a payment demand to Friends of Brian Stewart?
Strategy Group didn't think that they needed to send you the demand because they were a subcontractor to Constant Content.
That another
And
way
their
of saying
bill,
no.
let me finish my answer at least. Strategy and Media was a subcontractor to Constant Content, a corporation, which will come up later.
I'm going to
Okay.
object. He has
And Strategy and Media, well, you keep asking me about Strategy and Media, so I want to clarify, why would Strategy and Media have done anything with you? Because they did the work, they built Constant Content, and they were paid. So they had no outstanding debt or obligation because Constant Content paid that bill on the behalf of your campaign.
Where do you believe this radio ad ran?
If I look at exhibit in my files, exhibit H, which begins on page 60. The page number is cut off on page 60. So look for the H is cutting it off. So it's easy to find it. You get to the right page. So these are my evidence. One of my evidence that the radio ads ran is on page 65, which is the bill for the radio ads running. Page 65 and 66 is one bill, and page 69 and 70 and 69 is another bill. All downloadable from the FCC site, the actual invoices.
If I were to summarize, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I can summarize these invoices, they seem to indicate that this is a radio ad potentially allegedly running in Zanesville and Nelsonville, right?
No. There are parts of that in there, but the 2 pages that I just referred to, it's actually 3 pages. In my exhibits, page 65 at the bottom, 66, and 69, those are not the orders. The other pages before that are the orders. Those are actually the invoices for the radio ads running.
Are you aware of how many counties were in House District 78?
I'm not sure how that's relevant, but no.
If I represented to you that there were 6 counties in Ohio 78, it's the largest district in the state of Ohio, do you have any evidence to refute that?
No, but why would it matter to this case?
Well, if a radio ad ran on country music radio on a tiny station in Zanesville, 2 hours from my house, my law office, isn't it possible that I wouldn't hear that ad?
Yes, it's possible that you want to hear that ad, but I'm not sure why that's relevant. Once you became aware that the ad did run, you had an obligation to report it. As it probably an in-kind contribution, given that a third party had paid the bill for the ads.
Am I understanding your argument today that even if a committee is unaware that an in-kind expenditure was made and is never given notice from any third party that an in-kind expenditure has been made, the committee breaks the law if they don't report that in-kind expenditure that they're unaware of?
Yes, and it's absurd that you're standing here saying this when you participated in the production of the radio ad. This is the kind of thing that I think citizens get sick of from politicians. This notion of it's my voice in the radio ad, but I didn't know anything about it. And even when I found out about it, I, as a politician, I'm just the dumbest person on earth, and I don't have the right to do any investigation. I don't go to the FCC database. I don't clean up my finance reporting because I think I can get away with it.
Mr. Hicks, if you're getting the speech every time we ask a pretty basic question, we're gonna be here a long time, okay? Have you run for election yourself?
Yes.
Okay, so help me understand this. If you're running next year for township trustee, and I come down to Claremont County, and I decide that I want to send out 25 pieces of mail that say, Vote for Chris Hicks, paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart. That'd be an in-kind contribution, right?
No, because if there was no involvement of the candidate within the activity, then it's not an in-kind contribution.
Mr. Hicks, that's.
So hold on a second. This is PAC law. I'll have to remember the laws exactly. But it's not called an unrelated expense, but it's, if somebody does an expense, or these ads you see from PACs, if it was a PAC and you were set up as a PAC, and it was not and the candidate had absolutely no involvement whatsoever, you see an ad on TV, then they don't have to report anything. But when the candidate becomes involved, did the radio voiceover, the mailers were approved by them, then it has to be reported as an in-kind contribution. So that would come down to the answer to your question would be, if you did it completely on your own, like if some person on a street in Claremont County, just on their own, sent out 50 things on my behalf, and I had no involvement whatsoever, no knowledge or involvement whatsoever, there's a name for it. If it's just a person, it's not a
It's an
PAC.
in-kind contribution.
No, it isn't. It's an independent expenditure. It's not correct. You said the right word. It's an independent expenditure, which is entirely different than an in-kind contribution. As soon as you become involved in the activity as a candidate, it is an in-kind contribution. If you have absolutely no involvement, then you can make the argument it's independent expenditure, and that's when it's set up as a PAC to do that. So, Mr. Stewart, the point is, yes, for you to be involved and then 2 years later not have done anything to clean up your finance reports, that is a crime. That is illegal.
Yeah, we're gonna agree to disagree on your discussion of campaign finance law here, but if I just decide to run those ads, I don't tell you about it, and you don't put it on your report, you'd be breaking the law then, under your own standard, right?
As I just said, I want to clarify again, because you keep trying to put words in my mouth, and maybe there's a question there. It would depend on whether there was zero involvement or not, whether it was an independent expenditure that was done by just some person. If it's done by an individual, it's not technically called an independent expenditure then. But if it's done by a PAC, which you see all the time, ads on TV that are done by PACs where the candidate ostensibly has no involvement. By the way, there was a PAC involved with all this activity called Growth and Opportunity PAC. Anybody remember that name? That's where the PAC stuff was going on. And to this day, people like yourself claim that all that expenditure was a pure independent expenditure. And I have not raised any issues. Excuse me. Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, go right ahead.
Mr. Hicks, I want to make sure that we maintain the appropriate level of decorum. You have provided an opening statement. You have then questioned yourself. Now you're under cross-examination. We don't want raising a voice. We don't want ad hominem attacks, like references to the word dumb, and we don't want testimony from that seat. You'll have more than adequate time. Now, listening. No, we don't want you to provide testimony beyond the cross-examination questions. If you're asked a question that you need to explain, you may explain. We don't need anything beyond that. You've been given ample time and will continue to have time to testify beyond the cross-examination. We'd like you to not raise your voice, to be professional and not refer to things like people being dumb, and to answer the questions that have been asked. If you need to provide a brief explanation based on the cross-examination, you may do that. Beyond that, we'd ask that you limit it to the questions that are being asked.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to refer to the letter that it's in our packet as I think Exhibit 8, but I think it's in your packet if you recall, the letter from Friend Brian Stewart to David Goldstein.
Do you know what page that is?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that, like I said.
Page 32
32.
in my set.
Chair. Yes, Commissioner?
Representative Stewart, what page number is that in your packet?
It's Exhibit 8.
Exhibit 8.
It'd be about 2 pages in the back, but he's correct. It's 32 in his packet, if that's easier for us. Thank you. Mr. Hicks, obviously you've seen this letter before, correct? Has Attorney Goldstein produced a copy of any letters that he claims to have sent to Friends of Brian Stewart?
Say that again. What's the question?
Has Attorney Goldstein produced to you any copies of the letters that he claims to have sent to Friends of Brian Stewart?
No.
Why not?
I don't know why not. He's not here to testify right now, so We can ask him that when he testifies.
Did you subpoena those documents? Did you ask him for them?
I believe in one of the matters, he was asked to bring the letters with him, and he claimed in one of the candidates that he had lost the original letter or couldn't locate it.
Okay. Did he indicate that to you with regard to Friends Bryant Stewart?
No, and in fact, in the telephone conversation, he indicates looking at it while he's talking to me.
Well, where is it?
We'll have to ask Mr. Goldstein that when he appears.
Well, no, you had the opportunity to subpoena documents and get your case in order for today, and you didn't put that in your packet, right?
I guess, I didn't, well, I can't put in my packet what I didn't have, but I took on faith that you wouldn't be arguing that your response to something, you would question the existence of the thing you were responding to.
Do you have any written proof of what the specifics were of the claim that he alleges he made to Friends Bryant Stewart in your?
I believe it was in one of my complaints. But I believe it was something 13,000, or he mentions a specific number in the telephone conversation with me. You might remember
Yeah.
13,000 something.
Right. I proposed last night that we stipulate to the amount, and I think we can agree. You had a phone call. He said 13,000 some odd dollars for postage, mailers, and that was it, right?
When you say that was it, yeah, that his thing related to mailings, not to,
Didn't refer to radio ads.
Correct.
He just said postage, mailers, but no more specifics beyond that, right?
correct.
Okay. So has he produced to you a copy of a contract between Friends of Brian Stewart and Constant Content or anything?
No,
Why not?
I will have to ask him that. I can't read his mind.
Well, didn't you ask him for documents for your case?
No,
You didn't subpoena the guy that you think is a really important witness to give you documents that are relevant to this case?
I don't think the documents are particularly relevant to this case.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hicks, but you don't think that you don't think that the actual payment demand that you claim was made to my committee is a relevant piece of evidence in your case?
No, because I believe that this case is not about that. It's about, did activities take place that were paid that were not shown on a campaign finance report? This comes down to something very simple. Was the campaign finance report accurate or not accurate? And I believe there's more than sufficient evidence already that the campaign finance reports were not accurate and complete.
Okay, but if Friends of Brian Stewart has taken a position that David Goldstein's payment demand to us was bogus, and David Goldstein can't produce a contract or a payment.
I don't know.
Let me finish my question, please. If Friends of
I
Brian.
object to your characterization because I can also object
Executive
that
Director.
David Goldstein can or can't produce things. I don't know whether he can or can't produce things. He will have to answer to whether he can or can't produce things.
If
Is that objection thing?
Yes, go ahead.
if you as the complainant can't, let me rephrase. If Friends of Brian Stewart took the position that the payment demand by David Goldstein was bogus because there was no contract and no actual relationship there, which we authorize Constant Content to do things, isn't the existence of a contractor not pretty relevant to that case?
My answer to that question is no, primarily because, as I know from other cases related to Constant Contact, no candidate had a written contract. No candidate involved with the Larry Householder team had any written that I've encountered, they all maintained that there was no written contract and it was a verbal contract. So when you're on the stand, I can ask you, did you have a contract with Constant Content?
Sure you can. Yeah. In September 5th, 2021, when Friends of Brian Stewart sent this letter to David Goldstein, Jeff Longstreth had been indicted for a bunch of federal felonies related to campaign finance, correct?
Yeah, I don't know the dates of the indictments, but I'll take it that it was.
Just for the record, summer of 2020, Jeff Longstreth, Larry Householder, some other people got indicted for
I
racketeering.
think it was more, later than that.
Yeah. Summer of 2020, Jeff Longstreth indicted for racketeering.
Summer, what was the word you used?
Summer 2020.
Okay.
Yeah. Summer 2020, Jeff Longstreth is indicted for racketeering, money laundering, bribery, et cetera, right? Okay.
Correct.
So this payment demand is made more than a year after Mr. Longstreth had been indicted for money laundering, right?
Okay,
Yes or no?
yes.
Okay. Isn't it reasonable for a committee to be skeptical of a bill sent more than a year after the alleged debt was incurred by somebody who is hard up for money because they've been indicted by the feds?
I don't think it's reasonable to be skeptical when it relates to activities that candidates participated in. And I think that it is reasonable, if you asked me what was reasonable, I think it is reasonable that many candidates used the opportunity of those indictments to believe they had a get out of paying their bills card. And that money, by law, is still an obligation of the campaigns. It may be needed to be paid to law enforcement for recuperating the costs associated with the prosecution. But for example, not to go too long, apologies, but if I had a roofing contractor put a roof on and then they were indicted for some bunch of criminal activity, I still owe the money for the roof. That money would go to law enforcement then and the authorities as part of cost of the defray. I can't then say, well, because they got indicted, I don't owe the money anymore.
Mr. Hicks, on September 5th, 2021, Friends of Brian Stewart asked David Goldstein on behalf of Constant Content to provide a copy of the contract, provide some evidence of what this alleged debt referred to. If you have documentation, quote unquote, if you have documentation to the contrary, we would be glad to review it. Do you have any evidence in your packet of David Goldstein providing that documentation to Friends of Brian Stewart?
No, but I can't testify for David Goldstein. I subpoenaed David Goldstein to be a witness here and wish to examine him and cross-examine him, and he will be the person to ask those questions to.
But just so I'm tracking, in 2.5 years, you didn't subpoena documents from David Goldstein relevant to this case?
Asked and answered.
Oh, okay. Okay. Mr. Hicks, if you run for township trustee next year and you get a bill from me that says you owe Friends of Brian Stewart $13,000, are you going to pay that? No questions asked?
No.
Okay, why not?
I think that answering hypotheticals, I'm not inclined to do, is a hypothetical situation. That's not what the point is here. If you sent me a bill for activities I had been involved with, I might not, even then, I might not outright pay it, but I would certainly have proper diligence to figure out what I really owed and what had really happened. Because it wouldn't just be an out of the blue bill that somebody sent me in my mail if I never heard of. I'm getting a bill involved with something that I know there were things that took place because I personally participated in them, like mailers or radio ad.
You would require the person demanding money of you to prove that they actually are entitled to it, right?
I think I would do an investigation. I failed to see that this letter, I guess you're making a representation indirectly here, that this letter was your attempt to do an investigation. But I would say more that the letter was an attempt to wash your hands of it.
Your investigation would include asking the person demanding money of you to actually prove they're entitled to it. Show us documents, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if the person demanding money fails to give you those documents as a response to your investigation, you probably wouldn't pay the money, right?
I guess I don't get the question because you actually have the documents. The documents are Exhibit D. In this, that you provided them. You provided the documents to me that are at question of the particular mailers involved with the campaign that were done under your name. So you had them. David Goldstein didn't provide me those mailers, you did.
Well, actually, Mr. Hicks, do you recall your discovery request just said, send me everything that you sent received during the 2020 campaign?
I don't remember what my discovery request said.
It was pretty broad. You asked for everything, drafts.
Again, I asked and answered.
Well, I don't know that you have. Your request just asked for, it wasn't limited to just mail that was sent. You asked for drafts, you asked for
I
emails.
believe this is like that I said I wasn't going to call Nelson Embry. If you want to produce a document and show what I actually asked for, but I can't sit here and remember what was in a discovery document. And I don't think it was as broad as you're characterizing.
Okay, so you've picked one draft mailer out of a great big stack I gave you and included that in your exhibit packet. Do you have anybody coming in today to authenticate that they actually received that mailer?
So, no,
Okay, thank you. Do you have any evidence elsewhere in your packet that would authenticate or prove that that draft piece of mail actually was mailed out in that format?
I think it proves that somebody made it for you.
Okay.
Whether it was mailed or not, my belief is it was mailed, but that is my belief. Then, and that which you're rightfully point out, I don't have somebody gonna come in and testify to that belief. But it's not just a belief, it's a fact that somebody made those mailers for you.
So if I testify that that's a draft and there were many drafts and things get changed and it's not clear exactly what went out and that the disclaimer was changed, do you have anybody coming in that would be able to refute that or any evidence that would
This is
contradict
a
that?
hypothetical question that I don't even know what the question is.
I'm asking if you have any evidence or any witnesses who are going to come in and actually testify about what mail was actually sent or received.
But you just asked, your question before this was different than what you just asked. So you're kind of changing the questions on the fly, and I already asked and answered the question that you just asked
You have
right
no-
now.
You have no proof of what mailers
So
were
ask the
or
third time.
not sent. We haven't answered it yet, so I'm trying to answer.
I've answered it. I think I can't answer it more times. No, I don't have somebody coming in to testify they received the mailer.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I have facts based on what you gave me that the mailers were created. And that's what I have. And I think that alone shows that you were involved with and aware of things that were never reported on your campaign finance reports.
And just to be clear, I'm referring to page 47 of the complainant's exhibit packet where we've picked a mailer. Just going a few pages ahead in your packet, sir. You go to,
Is there a question about page 47?
I was correct for the record indicating what exhibit of yours I was referring to in the last line of questioning. If you go to page 51,
That's one of the mailers.
at the top of this draft mailer, can you identify what the disclaimer says?
Paid for by Citizens for Stewart.
Okay, that's wrong, right?
Okay,
I mean, Citizens for Stewart is not the committee name, right?
okay. Well, I don't know if it ever was the committee name.
Okay, so if I represented to you that that's a draft and before it went out, it was changed, do you have any evidence that would contradict that?
No, but I also have no evidence
Thank
of
you.
that it's on any report anywhere.
I'd like to go to page 86 of your packet.
Campaign finance report?
Yes, sir. Mr. Hicks, I'm going to represent to you that this is the 2019 annual report of Friends of Brian Stewart. Does that appear to be accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And at the very bottom of page 86,
86, okay.
there is a identification of expenditure to Old Trail Printing. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. What does it say that's for?
Campaign literature?
Do you have any evidence to prove what that expenditure was or was not for?
No.
So if in my testimony, I testified that that's paying for exactly the literature that you say we didn't pay for and didn't report, do you have any evidence that would refute that?
I believe that expenditure you're recording there says 10/31/2019. So I would maintain that the mailers that were done in February and March, when the campaign was actually going on, you probably didn't do in October of 2013.
How do
Well,
you,
I'm sorry, in October of 2019.
do you have any evidence of what that expenditure to Old Trail Printing was for?
No,
Did you subpoena Old Trail Printing to determine what that was for?
no.
Okay. So when you claim that the campaign didn't pay for any literature, there's an example of paying for literature, right?
Doesn't, first off, it doesn't say mailers. The time frame doesn't make any sense. But if we want to go on the argument, Mr. Stewart, that in October of 2019, you got literature made for February and March mailers, then that can be your representation, and I'll question you on that later.
Apologies, folks. We got some exhibits out of order. 1 second. I'd like to go to page 57 of your exhibits, Mr. Hicks. Can you identify this document?
I believe it's the, let's see what it was. Yeah, it was provided by Scott Schweitzer, the Chief Operating Officer of Strategy and Media. Is an invoice for work that was done for your campaign.
This is an invoice for the radio ad you allege was run relating to Friends of Brian Stewart, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I allege, and Scott Schweitzer from Strategic Media alleges.
Who does it say on this invoice that it was billed to?
Constant Content.
Okay. Do you have any corresponding invoice from Constant Content to Friends of Brian Stewart relating to this radio ad?
No.
Okay, thank you. Do you know who stamped this paid?
I assume it's,
I didn't ask if you assume. I said, do you have any?
well, then I don't know because
Okay.
because you're asking me to make representations about somebody else's invoice.
Okay. Let's go to page 63 of your exhibit packet. You read the top line of this document.
Candidate advertisement agreement form?
Do you know what this document is?
Yes, I believe so.
What do you think it is?
It's a required statement. I'm a lay person, so I apologize if I don't get it perfectly. But when political advertising is placed, there's a required form that needs to be submitted relating to who authorized and who's paying for the particular advertising that's taking place.
Okay, so the bottom left-hand corner of this agreement form, who does it say is the candidate and committee agency?
Well, on the authorized committee up above on the second line, it says Friends of Brian Stewart. And then the agency, which is what that is A Grant Think, which is an employee of Strategy and Media.
How do you know that?
Because it's come up in other hearings.
Okay, is anybody gonna come in and testify who Abe Brandt Fink is?
Scott Schweitzer,
Okay,
who submitted these with this, so he didn't submit these, but he submitted the invoices.
okay. Well, I'm gonna testify, I've never heard of this person, but we can come back to that later. Can we agree, though, it doesn't say Brian Stewart, it doesn't say Nelson Embry, right?
We can agree that it doesn't, but it also has a checkbox that the committee, the checkbox under undersigned represents that.
Do you have any evidence from Strategy Group for Media indicating that they sent any kind of similar form to either Brian Stewart or Nelson Embry prior to this radio ad form being filled out?
What's the question again? I'm confused.
Do you have any documentation between Strategy Group for Media and Friends of Brian Stewart prior to this ad form being filled out?
We can shorten this up a lot by, I have the information that's in my exhibits. So you keep asking me about information. Do I have this? Do I have that? I have the information that's in my exhibits.
Well, Mr. Hicks, that's how hearings work. I mean, you don't have a lot of evidence that you would otherwise seem to need to prove your case, so we're gonna go through that, okay? Is there any documentation the Strategy Group for Media has given you between that firm and Friends of Brian Stewart at all?
I think that, the documentation, no, but you've asked this question like 4 times now, I think. I have the documentation that's in my exhibits.
Okay. Did you subpoena Strategy Group for Media to provide you with any contracts or communications between them and Friends of Brian Stewart that relate to this radio ad?
I have the documentation that's in my exhibits, including an affidavit from Scott Schweitzer relating to the activities around the radio ad. I thought that was sufficient, and I think we could shorten this up a lot if you would focus on not dispensing
I'm gonna present my case, and I'm not gonna interfere with the way you present yours, okay? The question was, because you didn't answer it there, was, did you subpoena Strategy Group for Media
No.
for any documentation that they might have allegedly between their
Well, I
firm?
guess-
Let me finish my question, please, sir. Any documentation from Strategy Group for Media to Friends of Brian Stewart relating to this radio ad? Did you ask them for it?
I asked them for what had happened, and they produced an affidavit and the materials that are in the binder.
Okay,
I feel like they responded superbly to what I requested.
okay. So did you take that response to mean that no other documents exist?
I didn't think it necessarily matters if other documents exist, because I already have the evidence of what took place.
If Strategy Group for Media was running around placing orders for my campaign committee without me approving it, you don't think that's relevant to your claims?
I just find it hard to answer because we already have a radio ad where you participate in the production of the ad. You have the mailers. So I think that's the documentation that I need. So, but the answer to your question, I guess, is no.
I think it's gonna be easiest if we refer to Respondents Exhibit, which would be Exhibit 2, the pre-primary report of Friends of Brian Stewart.
What time period is this?
This is the pre-primary campaign finance report.
Give a page count.
I just don't have.
It's in respondents packet, Commissioner. It would be Exhibit 2. I think it's probably about 20 pages in.
So in mine, it's page number, in mine, it's page number 97. The blue number page. Same thing. Yeah.
Well, just to make, we're all looking at exhibit 2 of Mr. Stewart's exhibits. The first page is 27 pages. It's on the next page.
Thanks, Commissioner. Are we all relatively close if we go forward? Okay. Mr. Hicks, I'd ask you to go to page 4 of Respondents Exhibit 2. You see in the middle where you have two 31J1 entries,
Yes,
and can we agree that a 31J1 entry is an in-kind expenditure?
I have no idea what those numbers mean.
Okay. If I represented to you that those are the Ohio Republican Party reporting in-kind contributions to Friends of Brian Stewart for printing and postage, do you have any evidence to refute that?
No.
Mr. Hicks, do you have any evidence to prove that these in-kind expenditures by the ORP for printing and postage reported by our committee were not for the exact mailers that you've identified.
Yes,
What is that?
that somebody was making a request for payment for you from this because Constant Content had paid the bill. So the reason why Constant Content was making a request from you is because they are the ones who paid the bill. You may dispute that request, but they were trying to collect from you because they had already paid the bill to the vendors who did the work for their own.
I'm going to object to the witness testifying for an out-of-court witness who's not here.
Sustained, okay, understood.
I don't know what I testified.
I'd like to go to Respondents Exhibit 3, which is the 2020 post-primary report, please.
That's page 105 in the set that I have.
Well, I don't want to have different cross references here because
Starts on page 36 in the respondents.
Are you there, Mr. Hicks?
Yeah.
Okay. We go to page 2. There's 2 entries at the bottom of the page, both of them a 31J1 entry by the Ohio Republican Party. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the subsequent page, page 3 of the report of Respondents Exhibit 3, you then have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more entries.
Mr. Stewart, if I may, I'm sorry.
Stewart Exhibit 3, page 2. And the third exhibit is marked with a stamp in the bottom right. Exhibit 3, page 2. Exhibit 2 has 8 pages.
Right.
We're page 105 and so
Give me a minute, please. I want to follow. I'm
I'm
sorry, 3 page,
Exhibit 3, page 2.
3 page 2.
It's 3.
All right, I have it.
The
Thank
bottom
you.
2 entries he's referring to.
Thank you. Yes. Have it.
All relatively close? Okay, thank you. So again, just for our record, I'm looking at Respondents Exhibit 3, page 3. And I'm representing you, Mr. Hicks, that there are 6 more entries on this page where the Ohio Republican Party is reporting an in-kind expenditure. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can we agree that all of those entries are listed for printing and postage?
Yeah.
Do you have any evidence to prove that the in-kind expenditures by ORP for printing and mailing that were reported here by Friends of Brian Stewart were not for the exact mailers that you're talking about?
I believe I do, yes. Because Constant Content sought payment for you for those mailers that it had paid vendors or personnel to create. I think that's evidence that these are not them.
So because Jeff Longstreth, who had just pled guilty to a bunch of federal felonies relating to campaigns, because he says he's owed money, that trumps the Ohio Republican Party's report and my report.
You're wanting to make some sort of representation to the Ohio Republican Party's report. We're not looking at the reports. We don't have somebody here from the Ohio Republican Party to testify as to what was in or out of the report. So I find that what you're saying is wanting to create some assumption that you don't have any evidence for.
Well, Friends of Brian Stewart's reports indicate in-kind contributions by the Ohio Republican Party, correct?
Yes.
I'll testify to this later, but that suggests that we believe the Ohio Republican Party made these in-kind expenditures, correct?
I'm not disputing whether the Ohio Republican Party made these in-kind expenditures.
And you have no evidence that indicates what specific mailers were or were not covered by all of these 8 entries, right?
I believe I have evidence from what you've provided that those printing and postage expenses were all tied to mailers that were clearly labeled from the beginning as paid for by the Ohio Republican Party. Even in draft versions, things being made by the Ohio Republican Party, they don't put down other paid for buys on their materials and then later change them.
Take just one moment, commissioners. Let's consult. No further questions for this witness at this time.
I'm well, yeah, I'm glad to come back. I'll call Megan Fitzmartin, so she can be.
If you'll be sworn.
Swear from the whole truth. and nothing but
Does she have a copy of your exhibits?
Mr. Hicks.
Yeah, we have one this year.
I got one. I just gave her. I have.
Okay.
Thank you for being here again, Ms. Fitzmartin. Did you, during the 2020 campaign, what was your, just because there's a lot of new commissioners, I apologize, but could you describe what your role was on the 2020 campaign as it related to Larry Householder?
supported their efforts to win election.
And were you an employee of the Ohio Republican Party?
I was not.
Were you an employee of Constant Content?
I was not.
Were you an employee of JPL and Associates? I would say that contradicts your prior testimony.
That is accurate. I was a contractor,
Okay,
as we have talked about multiple times.
so let me restate my question. I apologize. Were you a 1099 contractor for the Ohio Republican Party?
No, I was not for the Ohio.
So you did no work for the Ohio Republican Party?
I worked for the Ohio House Republican Caucus.
Okay. So just since you brought it up, the Ohio House Republican Caucus, you were a 1099 employee of the 1099 of the Ohio Republican
I
House.
did work to support the Ohio House Republican Caucus.
Did that work relate to individual candidate activities like mailers and advertising or different?
Yep.
Okay.
Typical campaign work.
Were you a 1099 of Constant Content?
Yes,
Were you a 1099 of JPL and Associates?
yes.
Okay. And just for clarification, because I jumped when I was using the word employee incorrectly.
Mhm.
And I threw in JPL and Associates, or just for purposes of the commissioners that might not have been, what's the difference? What's the relationship or connection between JPL and Associates and Constant Content?
There are two entities that certainly had a number of clients that were similar.
Who was the principal of each entity?
JPL and Associates was Jeff Longstreth. You have to look up the Constant Content.
If I represented to you that Jeff Longstreth was the principal for Constant Content, it's
Never saw
found in
any
his
filings.
indictments.
Never saw any filings, so I'm sure you could look at the Secretary of State's website.
Okay. So who did you take direction from Constant Content?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
You said you were a 1099 employee of Constant Content.
I never said I was an employee.
I'm sorry, a 1099 contractor for Constant Content. Who did you take direction from?
I worked with Jeff Longstreth.
Okay. From who else from Constant Content provided you what I would describe as tops down direction? Not a
I'm not
colleague,
familiar with that phrase.
like, was Jeff, as it related to Constant Content, was Jeff Longstreth your boss?
I mean, again, I worked with him.
So if he wasn't your boss, who was?
Well, as a contractor, I actually was the principal of my own company. And so I was my own boss.
So you were paid as Megan Fitzmartin or paid as some other company?
MC Fitzmartin LLC.
Okay. In the stack of exhibits that is the respondents exhibits, so the one that has that exhibit 1 at the bottom. He has included a set of mailers. The respondent. I'm going to point that out here.
Exhibit 9.
You look for the mailers. Did you, well, let's stay on that for a second, but a question leading up to that is, did you work on any mailers related to Brian Stewart's campaign?
I did.
Did you do so on behalf of the Ohio Republican Party?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I mean, I guess they were on behalf of Brian Stewart for state representative.
Okay. Did you work on, and maybe Mr. Stewart can help me and point one out. Okay, so if I look at, there's some of these in here, but since they're not page numbered, but I can identify. I don't see numbers in the.
It's a base stamp number on the bottom right. Bunches.
Oh, they're hidden in the, hold on. Thank you. Gotta reorient my. Okay, so for example, on page where it says 17 on the corner. I'm just using this as an example. See that? So it says at the top, paid for by the Ohio Republican Party. Do you agree with that?
Let's see.
Did you create this mailer?
Well, I don't design. I wish I could.
Okay, were you involved with the production, creation, messaging for this mailer?
Yeah.
On whose behalf then?
To assist with Brian Stewart winning his state representative campaign.
So you were doing that as an employee of JPL and Associates or Constant Content?
Again, not an employee, sir.
I'm sorry, I will try to be better at using the term correctly. As a contractor,
You also contract, so I think you can appreciate the distinction. I certainly was working still with Jeff Longstreth. Yes.
so these mailers that say Ohio Republican Party, actually your answer surprised me, so that's why these mailers that say Ohio Republican Party, you had a role in them as an employee of, I'm gonna try to be better, as a contractor of Constant Content and JPL.
Yes, so vendors still work vendors will work with campaigns and the Ohio Republican Party or whomever.
Okay, and I don't mean this as I'm not meaning this in a legalistic way, but you're saying in essence, there was some coordination between Constant Content and JPL and the Ohio Republican Party in the purposes of these mailers.
I don't feel comfortable answering the term coordination.
Collaboration, let me use a non-legalistic term.
Yes.
So there was a collaboration between the Ohio Republican Party and Constant Content and JPL on these mailers.
Yes.
Okay. If you look at in my exhibit pack, which is the other bundle, and exhibit D, exhibit D,
Page number.
oh, I'm sorry. It's the one that would be 47, but the page number is kind of hidden by the mailer. It will be page 47.
Big B.
D, exhibit D.
D is in dog.
D, yes. But if you look at the page number, it's 47. Were you involved in the creation of these mailers?
Yes.
Did, as you were creating them, did you have contact with Brian Stewart?
I presume, but I don't recall. This was over 4 years ago.
Okay, what about Nelson Embry? Okay. Did, when these are labeled paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart, was that an error on your part in the creation of these? Or was there a distinction between things paid for by Brian Stewart versus the Ohio Republican Party? You don't recall? Did Constant Content as an organization, did it support candidates, a broad range of candidates, of which one was Brian Stewart in the 2020 primary?
I mean, a company worked with candidates, yes.
Okay, but specifically candidates that had been sanctioned by House Speaker Larry Householder?
There with the term sanction, that's not what we used.
Okay, endorsed by the House Republican Caucus slash whatever the name of it was at the time, slash Larry Householder?
I mean, I don't recall that he was, that, you know.
What did you
Representative
work with?
Stewart was endorsed by the caucus. I do recall that he was endorsed by Larry Householder.
Okay. Did you know that it was stated while you were sitting here that, for example, Gene Schmidt and Alan Freeman were not endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party? Were you aware of that?
Very aware.
Okay. And Brian Stewart was endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party,
Yes.
correct? Okay. And these mailers you were involved in producing or supervising, and they're labeled as paid for by the Friends of Brian Stewart. Is that correct?
That's what I see right here. Yes.
Okay. By the way, did you work as a contractor for JPL or Constant Content? Did you work with any candidates that were not endorsed by Larry Householder?
Yes.
Who?
I mean,
For the 2020 House Republican primary, if I wasn't specific enough.
well then, no.
Okay, so okay, when I add the clarity that I'm talking about the matters at hand, the 2020 House Republican primary, the only candidates you worked with were Larry Householder endorsed candidates.
As the Speaker of the House, yes. Very common in a caucus setting.
Okay. Are you familiar with Scott Schweitzer?
Yeah.
Did you work with Scott Schweitzer on behalf of Constant Content and or JPL and Associates?
On behalf of candidates, yes.
So I believe in his affidavit, and he'll testify later, that he believed he was working with Constant Content.
Okay.
So were you working with Scott Schweitzer in strategy and media? And
Strategy and media isn't a company.
Strategy Group for Media Incorporated and Strategic Media Placement. Are those companies?
They are.
Okay. Did you work with those companies?
I did.
Did you work with Scott Schweitzer?
I did.
Did you work on mailers with Scott Schweitzer for those companies? Did you work on media, things like television and radio?
Yes.
Did you work with Scott Schweitzer on the ad battle tested for Brian Stewart?
I do not recall that specific ad until it was just played earlier today, but I'm sure I did.
You're sure that you did? Okay. Did you do so on behalf of the Ohio Republican Party?
I would. Says that now.
Okay. Did you do so on behalf of, then who instructed you or gave you direction to work with Constant Content? I'm sorry, to work with Strategy Group for Media and Strategic Media Placement on a radio ad for Brian Stewart?
I don't recall who gave me specific instruction.
When you did so for other candidates or in general, where would that approval come from? Where would that instruction come from? For example, Jeff Longstreth, candidate just called you up.
I mean, it depends on what the issue at hand was. It's not just one person. So it's very difficult to answer, especially over 4 years later.
When you did mailers that were associated with the Ohio Republican Party, which you said you were involved with, when you were involved with mailers on behalf of the Ohio Republican Party?
I would argue that it's not on behalf of, that's just the disclaimer that's
Okay,
used.
when you worked on mailers with the disclaimer Ohio Republican Party, who approved those? Did anybody in the Ohio Republican Party approve them?
I don't recall.
Okay, when you worked on, did the candidate approve them?
I would certainly talk with candidates, but I cannot confirm that they would approve every single thing that went out.
Would you agree that in a prior hearing, it appeared that was related to Alan Freeman, who was not endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party, so I want to make that clear, that you and he were intimately involved with approving all those creative mail pieces in text messaging and emails and so forth?
We certainly communicated a lot, yes.
Did he, in that case, did he approve those mailers?
I'm sorry, how does this pertain to the matter?
Well, because I'm going to get to the question of whether Brian Stewart approved these mailers. And you expressed that you were unclear on what the approval was. And I'm just pointing out that there's a approval process that was clear in another case of how you were involved and approved.
I just want to put in a check.
Different case.
Okay. Who approved these mailers that are on page Exhibit D in my binder, which starts on page 47. Did Brian Stewart approve these mailers?
I would have to go back and look and see if he approved. I do not feel comfortable saying carte blanche, he approved every mailer.
Was it your normal practice, and have you previously testified that you always had the candidate approve mailers?
Typically, the candidate does approve a mailer.
Okay.
As I said prior, I also hesitate by saying 100% that is exactly what happened.
Did you work on radio ads for other candidates than Brian Stewart? Were any of those radio ads, or maybe could you characterize those radio ads as to that they had disclaimers of Ohio Republican Party versus disclaimers of the candidate, whether they were all candidate, they were mixed? Can you just characterize what kind of?
Because candidates get better rates, but I don't know. I'm not confirmed that all of them are paid for by the candidate.
Okay. But you were involved with the creation of the ad battle tested, to your recollection. You believe, for your recollection, you were.
Yep.
Okay. And the disclaimer at that end of the ad, you heard it while you were sitting here, was that not Brian Stewart speaking?
Correct, because for radio spots to have candidate rates, the candidate's voice has to appear on the radio ad.
So you were under the impression then, when that ad was being created, that it was being paid for by the candidate? Thus the disclaimer, paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart?
Yep.
Okay. And were you involved in were you aware of those, of a ad buy being placed for those ads?
I'm sure I was at the time, but I don't recall sitting here today.
Okay, so when it's clear, I think, it's clear that whether they did so authorized or what have you, Strategy, SMP, the Scott Schweitzer Organization, Strategy Media or Strategy Group for Media, I don't want to say the wrong company name, that there was an ad placed there. Were you aware of them ever placing ads without authorization from somebody? Did you ever have that experience?
Speak for them. So,
Were you involved with the request going to Strategy and Media to actually place ads, not just produce them, but to place them?
Sorry, I've done hundreds of campaigns. So this has been quite some time.
Okay, so you don't recall whether Strategy and Media placed ads without authorization during that period? Okay. Have you heard of David Goldstein? And how have you heard of David Goldstein?
I I met him, I guess, one of the previous meetings that I was here, up on 19. So
Okay.
that's how I came across.
Okay, but other than in a commission hearing, you've had no knowledge or interaction with David Goldstein.
No, sir.
Since the 2020 election,
Which one?
primary, okay, have you had, since the indictment of Jeff Longsworth, have you had ongoing engagement of in any way with Jeff Longsworth?
No.
Okay. Okay, I don't think I have any questions, but I don't excuse the witness.
Good after.
I know.
Good
Stop.
How you doing today? My name is Brian Garvine. How are you?
Fine, how are you?
Co-counsel with Brian Stewart. Doing well. I'm gonna try to be quick.
I appreciate that.
No problem. I figured you would. So, we never met before today. Is that correct? Okay. All right. And you can call me Brian. In fact, you want me to call you Megan or Miss Fitzmartin?
Megan's fine.
Megan, all right. Feel free to call me Brian. So just a little bit of background. So in 2020, you were an independent contractor for a few outfits that you already named. You were working on several campaigns, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And are you familiar with the concept, the in the can concept?
Yeah.
Okay. My understanding of it is that candidates will, and I know this myself, that drafts, there'll be drafts of mailers and drafts of commercials and drafts of radio ads that are formulated, but they're never actually used. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
And-
You have to be prepared for everything.
Right. It's common to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And it's common to do that well before a primary or a general election, correct?
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, is that your understanding that the thinking is we're gonna put them in the can, we're gonna film them, and we're gonna do the full commercial, whether it's radio, commercial, whatever, we're gonna do it. And then we're gonna kind of get a feel for whether or not we actually need to do it through polling and things like that. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And then if the polling's close, then let's do it. And then if it's not, then we don't. Is that fair?
Yes.
All right. And were you familiar at all, and you may not even recall, were you familiar with Brian Stewart's district in 2020, District 78?
Yes.
Is it a large district?
It's very large.
Okay, it was the largest,
Very unfortunate. A lot of travel.
several counties,
Yes.
largest one in the state.
Yes.
Is that correct? And would it be,
Yes, I don't, probably not to that, but yes.
right,
Yes.
all right. And so would it be reasonable that if an ad ran in let's say Zanesville or something like that, that Brian Stewart, a radio ad, he would have no idea?
That certainly could be the case.
All right. And then in terms of mail piece, mailers and so forth, is it typical to have a lot of drafts?
Indeed,
Okay.
much to the designer's chagrin.
Right, exactly. And they may, and those things could say paid for by friends of Brian Stewart, could say paid for by Ohio Republican Party. They could be drafts that never go out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And as you sit here today, I assume you don't have a recollection of which mailers went out and which ones didn't. Is that correct?
She did, but I do not.
Right. Like if I showed you every mailer in Exhibit 9 and then Exhibit D, you wouldn't be able to tell me what went out and what was just a draft, right?
No,
All right.
not sitting here today.
And was it your understanding that Brian Stewart, for the 2020 primary and the general, that he was endorsed by the Republican Party?
Yes.
And part of the significance of that is when you're endorsed by the party, that they will send out mailers at a significantly discounted rate than your own campaign would, correct?
Yes.
So it makes more sense financially to do that. Is that correct? In fact, it's not even close. Right? I mean, you're gonna pay like at least double
Yes.
or thereabouts.
Yes, it's based on the bulk rate for postage.
Okay.
Yes.
And then have you ever seen, related to the 2020 primary or general election, have you ever seen any of Brian Stewart's campaign finance reports?
No.
Okay. So if I showed them to you today and I showed some entries, you wouldn't know what they were for or what they weren't in terms of in-kind. You wouldn't,
Simply the item what
right,
the report demonstrates.
but you wouldn't know what they are. Okay, all right. And do you have a specific recollection of ever talking to Brian Stewart about a radio ad or a mail piece that he approved versus one that he didn't approve, or in any really way, shape, or form?
No, I know we certainly had discussions and making sure, part of my job was to make sure what was sent out or what, was designed was true to him. And so we talked about that, but I don't have certainly any recollection, again, over 4 years ago, of very specific conversations.
And how many campaigns were you working on in 2020 in the general and the primary?
63 Republican sitting members. Probably we filed a 93 seats, so 100.
Okay, so between the general, you were working on, you were doing some work on behalf of.
Again, different, like varying degrees, because
Sure.
obviously contested matters, but
Right.
you still feel to call it no matter what.
Right. You were doing some work to some level, to varying degrees for about 100 different candidates. Is that fair?
Yes.
Through those 2 cycles. All right. And then even if a candidate approves a radio ad or a mailer, or anything, doesn't necessarily mean that it goes out, correct? It could stay quote unquote in the can, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So approval doesn't necessarily mean that, I can approve the look of it.
Yeah.
And what it says, but it may not go out.
Correct.
And I may not know if it goes out, correct? I being a candidate, not me personally.
Yes. Understood.
And you don't know which, for Brian Stewart's campaign, you don't know. And actually for the designation of Friends of Brian Stewart campaign, you don't know that any of those mailers actually went out, correct? Like everything that we see here, that we've seen here, that says Friends of Brian Stewart, they could have been drafted and never went out, right?
Yes, I would hope some mail went out, but I cannot tell you which did or did not.
Right.
Correct.
Well, stated a different way, what could have happened and what makes more sense financially, as we just talked about, is if a mailer says Friends of Brian Stewart, intuitively, it's more likely that
I'm gonna
it's,
object because I don't know what he's representing. Intuitively, could have happened this way. Is there an actual question that's based on something tangible or just? theoretical stuff?
I know we need to hear the question first.
Well, I'm objecting to the fact that he's making all these hypothetical, how things, assumptions.
well, it's not in the sense that this is based on her experience. So my question is,
Testify to her experience, not you put words into her mouth about her experience.
well, I'm not, I'm asking her a question if she doesn't.
Excuse me, Counselor. We'll make the determination as to the propriety of the questions. If you have an objection, you can raise it. We first need to hear the question before we can rule on the objection.
Just as a point of order here, normally in these hearings, there's a determination of who is the person that rules on objections. I've made objections. Mr. Kirschner, you've repeatedly interjected at that point. Are you the person ruling on objections?
As a matter of fact, the executive director will provide decisions on objections. I have not ruled on any objections. I have not spoken on any objections. What I have done is pointed out decorum and professionalism in the hearing. For Mr. Richter to be able to respond to a question or an objection, we need to first hear the question. That's what we'll do. Mr. Richter will then make a determination as to the admissibility or propriety of the question.
So,
Overruled at this point, Esther.
but I also then want to clarify what he said is not correct. In the prior hearings, Mr. Richter, a member of the commission is designated as who will rule on objections. Typically, it's an independent member and it's clear who that member is that rules on objections. And then if I make an objection, they can say, whether it's sustained or not, and we move on without
was the case
speeches
in
from
the
the
Freeman
commission
case.
member so who is the person is ruling on objections during this hearing?
In the Freeman case, it was Mr. Norman. In the Schmidt case, it was me. Mr. Norman's no longer on the commission. I will be making those determinations.
So I would like it if I make an objection, you rule on the objection without speeches from any members of the commission.
The commission will do as it pleases as it relates to the ruling on objections. Our council will administer those rulings. Council, you may proceed.
Yeah, Mr.
Proceed,
Hicks,
Mr. Garvin.
Mr. Hicks, the commissioners have a right to express their comments and or questions. So we're going to allow Mr. Richter to rule on those objections, okay?
Okay.
So my question is, I'm gonna try to remember it now. Based on your experience, would you agree with me that it would make more sense if a mailer said Friends of Brian Stewart, with Mr. Stewart being an endorsed candidate of the Ohio Republican Party, it would make more sense that that was initially a draft, but that the actual mailer that went out would have gone out by the Ohio Republican Party because it would have been literally a half the price. Does that make sense?
To be fair, yes, it would make sense, but I can't
Right.
speak.
No, and I understand that, but I'm just saying, based on the
Yes.
fact that he was an endorsed candidate, it would, to say it another way, it would almost be foolish to not have the Ohio Republican Party send it out, because it's gonna cost you at least twice as much. Is that fair?
Yes,
Okay. I mean, you could do it, but it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense.
correct.
All right. All right. And are you aware of any documents between Constant Contact and, is it Strategy Group? I can't remember the name of it. Is it what is it?
The strategy group, and then they have a placement company, so it's, but yes, strategy group is the umbrella.
I'm gonna say those groups. Are you aware of any communication, because I haven't seen, are you aware of any communication between those groups and Mr. Stewart before he had any deadlines for his campaign finance reports or anything? You aware of any of that?
I'm not.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
You look at it in the respondents packet, page, it's labeled 27. It's one of the mailers. I just randomly picked it. And then in my packet, look at, it would be page, I think 49, but the number's cut off. It's the one that has a picture of Mr. Stewart and Donald Trump.
Sorry about your number.
So I think if you go of mine, the last one where you can read, then the page number is 46. So it'll be page 49 if you just flip forward 3 pages. It's this one. Everybody see?
Gotcha.
So the bulk rate permit on the one that is page 27 in the respondents package, what does it say the bulk rate permit is?
Postage paid Ohio Republican Party.
And then if I look at the page I directed to you in my exhibits, what does that say?
Actually, I'm sorry, I think I pulled up, it looks the same, but it's slightly different.
I don't think it looks the same. I'm just putting that one.
Again, I thought I
Okay.
had the right one, but I don't believe I do, so I don't want to misspeak.
Well, so if you,
Page 40, Melody.
Yes, page 40.
Respondents, or the complainants materials. Okay, then go forward.
And just look at that, am I able to just keep this straight?
oh, yes, this. Believe it or not, my stat, but I think it's that.
You think, or you know, I just want to make sure.
I know.
I don't want to respond incorrectly.
That's,
Okay.
okay, so what's the permit say on that one?
First class mail, US postage paid Columbus, Ohio, permit 6871.
So in the design process, is it normal to have the permit that you're a differing permit than what you're actually going to use in the future on the mailer?
As I've stated before, I'm not the designer, so I can't speak to that.
Okay, you testified that you work with 100 candidates?
An estimation. Quite a few.
Isn't it fair to say that in reality, in the 2020 campaign cycle, there were some much smaller number of candidates that were in contested races that you work with, like in the order of 20 to 25?
The 2020 campaign cycle would include both primary and general, so much more than 20.
I'm sorry, say that again.
The 2020 campaign cycle includes both the primary and the general election. We speak and reference it as a cycle, so many more than 20.
In the Ohio House races? Okay, so how many then do you think it was? We know it can't be 100 unless it was more than the number of reps in the,
Nearly 100. And you've then taken it down to just Ohio House. So between the primary and the general election, there are a number of contested races. So I think upwards of 60 in terms of those that had opponents.
okay. You testified to, so I mentioned my wife's a professional artist and when she's doing work where she's getting paid.
Yes, I've heard that quite a few times.
You know, when you testified about revisions and you were asked a lot of questions about, are there many revisions and in the can and things we didn't actually send out? If a person's being compensated for doing that work, doesn't that work need to be reported like work that went out? Okay. So I take it at face value that you don't know. When you did that kind of work and you said, was your representation that you didn't know for sure what went out, what did and didn't go out?
What I'm sitting here before you saying is that I cannot in August of 2024 tell you definitively what did or did not go out in March, somewhere between February and March of 2020. Again, I've worked on a number of campaigns in the interim, and I do not want to misrepresent anything, any single thing that I've done.
So in the example, so did you in any way, did your pay differ for based on things that were drafts and what went out and what didn't went out, or were you just paid?
I was paid on retainer, which I have testified before you.
So those things that were drafts and going in, over and over again, or whatever the testimony was, those particular things, if you were just paid on a retainer, then you were paid for that work and coordinating those activities? Substitute a term that you'd prefer to use.
I certainly worked on efforts to support candidates, yes.
Okay. And some of those efforts that, assuming it was valid, the in the can thing, some of those efforts, did you ever tell vendors downstream or have any role in telling vendors downstream, like strategy and media, that, for example, we're not going to pay you for work that you've done because we're not actually going to use it? It's in the can.
I don't understand the question.
So I guess they brought up this distinction of you can have stuff in the can that never got sent out. And I'm bringing up the distinction, well, if people were paid for creating that stuff, it's still a campaign expense. And so I'm asking a clarifying question, if you ever told a downstream vendor that they were not going to be paid for something because it didn't actually go out.
I'm not familiar with the term downstream vendor, so I'm not sure I can answer that.
Okay, so somebody who is doing you testified that you weren't actually doing the creative work in Adobe products, for example. Somebody else was doing that work, okay? So were those designers only paid for work that went out?
On record.
Did you hire the designers?
I did not.
Who hired the designers?
I don't recall.
Were they contractors to Constant Content and or JPL and Associates?
I have no way of answering that.
Okay. All right, I have no further questions at this time, but I don't excuse the witness.
You have follow-up.
Just a couple quick follow-ups. Very quick. So Megan, on that, the comparison between the two.
Yes.
So one of them, I'll represent to you. I mean, you can pull them back out, but I'll represent to you. One says paid for by the Ohio Republican Party, and then that's got the mail notation paid Ohio Republican Party. And then in the mailer that says paid for by Prince Brian Stewart, that says permit 6871. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you know who owns permit 6871? Okay, but I mean, do you know who that's assigned to?
No, not off the top of my head.
Okay, do you know, if I told you that Campaign Friends of Brian Stewart does not have a permit number. Would you, do you have any reason to dispute that?
Yes, sir.
Could that permit number be assigned to the Ohio Republican Party?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay. And then in terms of the in the can, you know, we talked about that. I talked about that a little bit with Mr. Hicks. I think you said you're not familiar with how those services are paid for, correct?
Correct. That was not in my duties.
Okay. What could happen is there could be an arrangement with those companies to say that their payment will be for what's ultimately used, correct?
I object.
Okay.
This, what could happen, should, the witness has no knowledge as to what could happen.
I understand.
Pure speculation.
Overruled, go ahead. I mean, it's, okay, so her answers are indefinite. I mean,
She was
Sort
asked a
of the board's
specific
way.
question about how other vendors perform. She has no basis to have an answer to that question. It's not a proper question for her.
Well, it is in the sense that she has a lot of experience and the board can weigh what she says for what it's worth or what it's not.
Is she an expert witness? Do we need to get to qualifiers or expert witness on this?
You call
My
it.
point
First
is,
of all, I'm not-
she's,
I'm-
that.
But I'm not
a
asking.
very simple point. You know, the question should be connected to the actual direct experience and knowledge of the witness, not asking them to speculate about how other entities operate, or could it be normal that this would happen?
Well, she has a tremendous amount of experience in this field, and if she has no knowledge, she can say she has no knowledge, or she can make an educated guess, and then it's up to the board how much weight they put in, how, you know.
proceed.
So my last question is just to clarify, in your experience, could the arrangement be that something to the effect of that the company that has made that commercial or radio ad or so forth would be paid on an as-used basis? Is that possible?
Having worked for a media firm since the campaigns that I worked for the Ohio House, yes, it is entirely possible that a firm can do work and not bill the client for it if it's not used.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
My understanding is there any follow-up? No follow-up questions from Mr. Hicks.
Commission questions.
Commissioners, any questions of the witness? Go ahead, Mr. Knight.
So I understand you weren't involved in billing, but you were paid by Constant Content for GPL for this broad campaign, right?
Yes, that's not, again,
On-
container,
on-
yes.
Okay, so whether the radio ad is played, the mailer is sent or in the can, you're getting paid your retainer, right? So and I guess I'm asking you a campaign finance question, which is fair, but doesn't that have to be somewhere accounted for within this construct? Right, your time or your consultant, you're paid on retainer. The end client or the campaigns, you're working on these activities, doesn't somehow either there's a direct payment for your time or an indirect in kind, one way or the other. And this, unless I'm misunderstanding the dynamic.
Again, that's not my expertise. So I